In Marvel, I am Homelander. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 1: The Strongest Superman System. As the sun set and the moon slowly climbed into the sky, a handsome, aloof 16-year-old boy walked towards home. John Kent, exhausted after a day of school, just wanted to return to his cabin and get a good night's sleep. The intense fatigue made it impossible for him to maintain his usual professional, sunny smile. The strongest Superman system has been activated. Suddenly, a mechanical voice rang in John's mind, causing him to pause. His body was too tired to process what was happening, and he subconsciously thought this, but the mechanical voice sounded again. Yes, host, the strongest Superman system has been activated. Would you like to claim your newbie gift pack? Only then did John realize what was happening. After a second or two of stunned silence, his heart began to pound, and his handsome face flushed with excitement. Finally here. 16 years. 16 years in this shit-filled place. After all this bad luck, I finally turned things around. John gritted his teeth and forced out these words, then punched a nearby lamppost in a fit of rage, managing to scrape his knuckles. But the slight pain in his hand didn't affect his thoughts. After the punch, his expression returned to calm, and he shook his head, glancing around. Confirming no one had seen him, he pretended nothing had happened and quickened his pace towards home. On his way home, he mentally bombarded the system with questions. System, tell me your origins, your abilities, and the obligations I have to fulfill after using you, John thought to himself. Yes, host. I am the strongest Superman system, created from the vast multiverse of information based on the image and abilities of Superman in your mind's DC universe. Just as my name suggests, as long as you do good deeds like the Superman in your memory, achieving a certain quantity and quality, you can gradually unlock the upper limit of Superman's power, ultimately becoming the strongest Superman, the Superman of my memories? John wondered. I remember more than just the good Superman, there are also the unjust Superman and superpowered ones. So, can I unlock those abilities by doing bad things? No. The system decisively rejected his idea. Okay. John, still on his way, sighed helplessly. Doing good was much harder than doing bad. After all, doing good required waiting for bad things to happen, but doing bad could be done indefinitely if you wanted to. Destroying a planet is much easier than saving it, John subconsciously thought. Host, you're going a bit too far. Let me remind you, if the evil value you've accumulated reaches 1/10 of the justice value, this system will immediately break the chain and disintegrate on the spot. Is that so? John exclaimed anxiously, hurriedly asking, what is my current ratio of evil to justice? Your ratio of evil to justice is 397, which is still within an acceptable range. Please keep up the good work, host. John breathed a sigh of relief. Thanks to realizing over the past decade or so that he'd been reborn into this godforsaken Marvel world, he hadn't dared to do anything bad, not even get into fights, for fear of some villain jumping out and killing him. On the contrary, since becoming wealthy, he'd occasionally donated money to disaster relief efforts. Don't worry, system, everyone who knows me knows I'm a good person, John assured him, then asked, what's the newbie gift pack? The newbie gift pack is body modification, transforming all the cells in your body into Kryptonian cells, granting you the ability to grow stronger by sunbathing. Hearing this, John's breathing quickened, but since they were outside, and who knew what might happen with a modification, he could only suppress his emotions and quicken his pace back. Along the way, John mentally asked the system many questions about its rules, such as how to determine if something was good, and how to do some bad things within reasonable limits. After all, since the system required him to be a good person, he could certainly do good things and be a good person too. After a series of questions and answers, John successfully returned to his rented apartment building. Just as he was about to enter, a pleasant female voice sounded behind him. Hi, Kent, still up in the lab again tonight? The sudden voice behind him sent a chill down John's spine, and he gently released the doorknob he was about to turn. He forced a professional, cheerful smile onto his face, pretending it was nothing. Turning around, John saw a blonde girl in a dark green trench coat holding a bag of trash, smiling at him. John was, of course, familiar with the person in front of him, Gwen Stacy, a recurring NPC in Spider-Man movies, sometimes even a contender for the lead role. Of course, I've been a bit busy lately with my research progress, John said as usual. Then, as if remembering something, added, I just remembered something, let's talk at school tomorrow. By as soon as he finished speaking, he smoothly opened the apartment door, slipped inside, and slammed the door shut. Gwen stared speechlessly at the closed door, muttering, what's going on? My heart is beating so much faster than usual. Did something happen? Remembering the slight abrasions on John's hands she'd glimpsed earlier, Gwen felt increasingly uneasy and decided to ask again tomorrow. Finally back. John wiped the sweat from his brow after entering the house. He quickly sealed all the doors and windows tightly to ensure no one could see him before stripping naked and entering the bathroom. Inside, John looked at his well-proportioned figure in the mirror, took a deep breath, and said, System, claim your newbie gift pack. Yes, host. You are now beginning the complete transformation of all your cells into first-generation Kryptonian cells. Total time, 5 hours. The words had barely left John's mind when he felt a tingling sensation throughout his body. It's starting? I thought it would hurt a lot, and my body doesn't seem to be changing at all, John exclaimed in surprise, looking at his body. To protect the host's mental health, this system has diverted some modification energy to ensure the host's physical form remains within the normal range. However, at the genetic level, modification has officially begun. Wait? John hurriedly waved his hand to interrupt. Won't this diverted energy affect the final modification results? Yes, host, the system replied. According to calculations, after the modification is completed, the conversion rate of your cells after absorbing solar energy will decrease by about 3%. Hearing that this would affect his future growth rate, John quickly ordered in his mind, then what are we waiting for? Use all the energy on modification, don't waste any extra. Bang! Before John could finish speaking, the humanoid form maintained by energy completely collapsed. With a loud bang, the entire person directly turned into a blinding white light and exploded. Note, the last sentence is a disclaimer about the story and is not part of the narrative. Chapter 2 Sunlight falls on my shoulders, as if I were a citizen of my motherland. Ugh. After an unknown amount of time, John, now back in human form, uttered a muffled, unconscious murmur before his consciousness gradually returned. Feeling the coolness of the bathroom floor, he propped himself up. His somewhat fragmented mind cleared instantly as he recalled everything before losing consciousness. System, are you there? System, John called out in his mind. Yes, host, the system's monotone, mechanical voice echoed in John's mind. Confirming it wasn't a dream, John breathed a sigh of relief and stood up. Feeling that his body was largely unchanged from usual, he asked in confusion, System, I don't feel any difference from usual. Was the modification successful? Host, the modification was a complete success, but your body hasn't reacted to sunlight yet, so there haven't been significant changes in your physical attributes, the system said. It's already morning outside. Once you go outside and get some sunlight, you'll feel the changes. John stood up, quickly put on the clothes hanging on the rack, and rushed outside impatiently. The moment he opened the door, the morning sunlight streamed down his body. Power surged forth, a feeling he'd never experienced in over a decade of sunbathing surged through his entire body. A terrifying power erupted from every cell in his body. John could clearly feel it. His physical abilities were increasing at an alarming rate. Increasing in strength. Increasing in dominance. He only took 2 steps forward, and his shoes were torn apart by the immense force he hadn't yet adapted to. Simultaneously, as time passed, his vision became increasingly clear. With a slight concentration, he could see flies buzzing hundreds of meters away. The previously quiet environment began to become noisy. The sound of his own heartbeat and blood flowing, the faint hum of the surrounding electronic equipment, and the snoring of his sleeping neighbor all assaulted his eardrums in an instant. Holy shit! Holy shit! Holy shit! John couldn't help but cry out in pain, then covered his ears and knelt on the ground, unable to cope with the surrounding noise. Calm down, that's how Superman does it in the comics. Take a deep breath, then calm your mind, gather your thoughts, and gradually block out the surrounding noise, he mentally reassured himself, and after a dozen seconds, the surrounding noise did indeed gradually decrease, slowly returning to a level he could tolerate. John exhaled deeply, then opened his eyes and looked at the world before him, so different from before, and finally couldn't help but laugh out loud. The feeling of gaining power was so wonderful. This was the first time he had felt so happy since arriving in this shitty world. From now on, I can do whatever I want. John clenched his fist, feeling the surging power in his arm. He estimated that his strength had increased at least 100-fold. Wait, only 100-fold? John was somewhat incredulous and hurriedly called out to the system in his mind. System, am I mistaken? I feel like my strength has only increased 100-fold. Host, your calculation is correct. Compared to before you left, your muscle strength has increased by approximately 109 times. Under ample sunlight for the next 12 hours, your strength is expected to stabilize at around 200 times your normal level, subsequently increasing by 9 times each day. John estimated that, without considering impact, the muscle strength of an average person's punch is no more than 50 kilograms. He was slightly better, around 70 kilograms, due to his previous training. A 100-fold increase would be about 7 tons. If converted to game stats, his initial physical attributes were 1, reaching 200 on the first day, and increasing by 9 each day thereafter. According to the system, reaching 200 times today, or 14 tons, would barely match Spider-Man's normal level, which wouldn't be bad for a normal superhero. However, the problem was that he possessed Kryptonian genes. In his mind, even if it wasn't comparable to the Silver Age, reaching a little more than the level of the Man of Steel movie would be acceptable. In the movies, Zod's strength was enough to go toe-to-toe with Superman after just a little sunshine on a cloudy day, easily demolishing buildings. Calculations showed that his minimum strength was at least 100,000 tons. The system said that even if he spent another day in the sun, he could only reach a level of 14 tons. That's not Superman at all. He might not even be able to compare to Homelander. System, didn't you take a cut from the energy used for the modification? How come it's only 7 tons? John complained, feeling a bit resentful. Replying to the host, this system did not take any cuts. This modification is based on the comic book version of the original Superman. If you want to unlock a higher level Superman template, please do more good deeds. The comic book version of the original Superman? John's lips twitched. Recalling the original Superman's performance, he could only carry cars at first, then throw tanks, and finally pull a 10,000-ton cruise ship, running faster than a bullet, and only holding his breath for a few hours at most. Thinking about it that way, it seemed the original Superman was indeed lacking. There was nothing John could do but accept reality. It's decided. From today onwards, I'm going to be a super good Samaritan who goes wherever there's trouble. John set himself a small goal. Host, a friendly reminder, misfortune always comes from the same place, you should call it a jinx. Don't worry about the details, anyway, I'm going to start doing good deeds from today, and I'll fight anyone who tries to stop me. But before that, let me test what my current power can do, John thought to himself, when he heard the second-floor window opposite his door being opened. Who? John looked up alertly. He saw Gwen in her pajamas, looking down at him with a questioning gaze through the window. Sensing her mood, John looked down at her. He then realized that in just a short time outside, his shoes were already torn, and the knees of his pants were covered in dust from kneeling. His attire made him look like a down-on-his-luck nobleman wandering the streets. Seeing him in such a disheveled state, John scratched his head awkwardly, feeling like he'd been caught secretly playing with erotica. However, the two weren't particularly close, so John pretended nothing had happened, casually greeted her on the windowsill, and went back inside. As for the strength test, let's talk about that after school tonight. Something's wrong. Gwen's eyes narrowed slightly, guessing, could Kent be in some trouble? But, is it just my imagination? She recalled how John looked before he went back to his room. The abrasions that had bled last night were nowhere to be seen. All the different things he had done in this short time made her feel that John might have gotten into some serious trouble. Watching John go into the building, and thinking of her classmate's pitiful background, Gwen felt that if he really was in trouble, she should indeed lend a hand. Chapter 3, Teaching Spider-Gwen? Late at night, in a dark alley, a woman in her 40s was pinned against a wall by 2 masked men. One of them covered her mouth, turning her piercing scream into a desperate whimper. After you strip her clothes off, let me have my fun first. You check if there's anything valuable inside. You can go first next time, one of the men with a rough voice said. His accomplice didn't object, simply nodding before the two began to act. The woman struggled desperately, but she was no match for the two men. Just moments before, she had merely been passing through the alley when these two dragged her in and began stripping her clothes. Behave yourself. If you move again, you'll get a knife. Seemingly annoyed that the woman's struggles were a waste of time, the rough-voiced man slapped her twice across the face. Moments later, two bright red handprints remained on her cheeks. The pain of the slap fueled the woman's despair. Facing what was to come, she could only pray for God's help. Unbeknownst to the three in the dark alley, a figure stood atop the wall behind the woman, silently observing the scene unfolding before them. The figure on the wall was entirely black, from its face mask and hood to its clothes and shoes. Watching the actions below, the figure remained silent, then with a powerful leap, it landed silently behind the two burly men. The rough-voiced man was still tearing at the woman's clothes. With his efforts, he finally ripped off her slightly deformed outer garment. Just as he was about to continue, a dark hand silently gripped his throat and squeezed hard. Ha! 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 The man felt his throat being tightly gripped by a hydraulic vice. The immense force completely blocked his airway, and his face quickly turned red from lack of oxygen and congestion. He struggled to turn his head, wanting to know who had done it. But when he turned, he found his companion had already collapsed unconscious, leaving him the only one still struggling. The man in black watched the man struggle lifelessly. Only when the man's heartbeat gradually slowed, confirming he was unconscious, did he release his grip and toss the man aside. The woman who had been watching from the corner was completely stunned. She never expected anyone to actually come to her rescue. But the next moment, another thought surged into her mind. This man is dressed in black, and his attack was so swift and decisive. Could he not be a good person either? What if he asks me to pass the baton to his two men? Before she could worry for long, the man in black stepped forward. The man in black, his expression obscured by sunglasses, scanned her up and down before speaking in a slightly childish voice. "Auntie, don't go to such dangerous places next time. You can handle these two, whether you call the police or leave them alone." "Ah, Auntie?" The woman was taken aback. But the man in black didn't care. He lightly leaped over the 3-meter-high wall and disappeared from sight. Only after the man in black disappeared did the woman react. Seeing the two people who might wake up at any moment, she was startled and quickly picked up her clothes from the ground, running towards the alleyway exit. On the other side of the wall, the man in black breathed a sigh of relief and asked in his mind, "System, is this considered doing a good deed? Show how long until the next stage of the Man of Steel movie is completed." The man in black was John Kent. As soon as he asked, a progress bar appeared in front of him. 0%. Hey, what's going on? Why isn't the progress bar changing? Looking at the bar that was still 0, John couldn't hold back any more and questioned in his mind. "Host, according to calculations, your progress this time is 0.003%. Because it's less than 1%, the displayed value is rounded to 0. Only 3 in 10,000? That means I need to do another 30,000 of these things to level up?" John thought about how he'd been wandering around this area for over an hour tonight before encountering this bad thing. At this rate, whether he could level up within 10 years was questionable. "Yes, host, the greater the impact of an event, the more you participate, the less damage it causes, the more perfect the result, and the more energy you gain. This event's impact is only worth 3 in 10,000, the system said in John's mind. Alright, next time remember to display the progress bar to 3 decimal places." John waved helplessly. It seemed that leveling up was a long and arduous journey, and his main focus for leveling up should be on the main storyline of the Marvel movies. These minor events were just supplementary. Speaking of major events, it seemed he needed to contact Peter Parker, who was from his school. In John's memory, whether it was the extraordinary version that nearly turned the entire city into lizards, or the nuclear test in the old trilogy that almost went out of control, both were major events with enormous impact. This should be enough to acquire energy a million times greater than the rapist's level, right? Doesn't that mean he could instantly acquire the next stage of energy, maybe even skip several levels? Ending his daydreams, John turned to the corner and said, "Hey! You hiding behind the wall, you've been hiding for minutes, it's time to come out." As soon as he finished speaking, A woman with a slender figure, wearing a white hood and a tight-fitting white top and black bottom with a black blouse dividing her body, appeared from the corner. "Hey, hello superhero, I mean no harm. I'm just a newbie superhero with no experience, and I saw you were quite professional, so I was just standing there to learn from you." The woman raised her hands, making a harmless gesture, trying to lower John's guard, unaware that John was already in shock. "Gwen Spider-Man, are you kidding me, my Luo Xianai? This version is wrong." John thought to himself, frantically. So, this is the comic book version of Gwen's Spider-Man, or a version from the Spider-Man parallel universe, but what's with Tony Stark next door who just announced he's Iron Man? John slapped his forehead, speechless. He had never thought of this before, but recalling Gwen's slightly noticeable gap between her front teeth in reality, he finally realized that this was indeed the world of the Spider-Man parallel universe. Seeing John staring blankly at her, Gwen continued, "Hey, Mr. Hero, can you teach me how to be a good vigilante in New York?" Huh? John was stunned. Chapter 4, Biological Perspective. "Isn't that amazing?" "You said, cough cough, what did you say? You want me to teach you how to be a superhero?" Hearing Gwen's request, John was about to speak, but then realized they knew each other in real life, so he deliberately lowered his voice. "That's right, you should be able to tell that this is my first time doing something like this, so I want you to teach me what a superhero should do," Gwen pleaded, clasping her hands together. "How can I tell you I'm a complete newbie too? And in terms of fighting power, I might not even be able to beat you right now with your spider sense." John slightly twitched his lips, then began to seriously consider Gwen's request. Even if he hadn't seen a pig run, he'd eaten pork. Although they were both newbies, having watched so many Marvel and DC movies in his previous life, teaching her some hero tips shouldn't be a problem. Thinking about her true identity, he still felt he should lend a hand, and system, if I teach her how to be a superhero, after she graduates, will I get a share of the good deeds she does? John asked the system in his mind. A portion of the credit will indeed be attributed to the host, but since the other party is already preparing to become a superhero, the host's appearance won't have a significant impact at this point, so the percentage will be limited. Okay, as long as there's some profit, every little bit counts. Hearing this, John's smile behind the mask grew even more gentle. Of course, no problem. The more people who serve the people, the better. Naturally, I should teach you some essential knowledge that superheroes must know. John lowered his voice. Really? That's great. Meanwhile, Gwen, seeing that the man in black hadn't moved, thought he had refused, but she was overjoyed that John agreed so easily. At this moment, the still newbie Gwen didn't realize that if this man in black was truly a seasoned superhero, then why had she never heard of his name before? Moreover, this man in black didn't even have a decent uniform, and wasn't as well prepared as she was, like a hero with nothing to show for it. Seeing Gwen's delighted expression, John asked, "As a superhero, you should be well prepared, right? You mean, of course, a special radio that connects to police channels. Without it, how can you arrive at an incident in time?" John revealed his purpose. He had only just received the system yesterday, and this kind of thing, a must-have for street heroes, was still undelivered. If she had it, he could just use it instead of running around aimlessly, only completing one job every hour. He also knew Gwen definitely had it, because with his superhuman hearing, he could hear even the slightest vibrations from the internal components of the earpiece inside Gwen's mask. "Oh, I have one." Sure enough, upon hearing John's question, Gwen pulled out a biscuit-sized high-tech signal receiver and one of the earpieces from somewhere in her bodysuit and handed it to him. Taking the still-warm receiver, John familiarly put it in his ear, nodding with satisfaction. "Very good. It seems you've prepared thoroughly. This isn't just for fun, you've shown considerable patience, which is reassuring." John's praise made Gwen, who had been somewhat worried, instantly smug. The eye mask, previously adorned with pink eyeshadow, immediately curved into a crescent shape. She really believed it. This mentality is still a long way from that of a mature superhero. Looks like I need to train her properly, John mentally assessed Gwen. Just then, John put on the headset, and soon a signal came through. "All officers, a bank robbery has occurred at 3168 Fifth Avenue, Wells Fargo Bank. A total of 7 people are involved. Suspect number 1 is a white male, armed with a Beretta 92F handgun. Suspect number 2." Hearing the description in the headset, John's expression sharpened. What a coincidence. This bank robbery must be several times faster than those two rapist robbers. He casually called out to Gwen, who was still in a daze. Got the message? Follow me, or it'll be too late. I'm going first. Before Gwen could say anything, John pushed off the ground with both legs, unleashing 40 or 50 tons of force. To Gwen's astonishment, he silently leaped over 10 meters high. When he landed, he was already dozens of meters away, and with a few more leaps, he disappeared from Gwen's sight. While Gwen couldn't help but exclaim, glancing at the spotless ground, wondering how this senior had done it. With her current strength, which was no less than John's, she could certainly do the same. However, each jump would likely leave a footprint several inches deep. Normally, she had to hold back when she moved, and John's display of skill left her completely bewildered by this seemingly effortless display. But my signal receiver is still with him, right? My headphones aren't getting a signal from this distance, Gwen said helplessly. With no tall buildings around and no Uncle Ben to lend a boost from above, she could only restrain her strength, running towards her destination with several times the power of an ordinary person. On the streets of New York, John leaped across the streets using brute force, his incredible speed creating gusts of wind around him. Despite being tens of meters above the ground, John felt no fear, knowing that even if he were to free fall unprepared, he wouldn't be injured upon impact. Compared to his muscular strength, Superman's most terrifying aspect was actually his physical defense, which was several times greater than his physical strength. Although he had only recently become Superman and hadn't yet achieved flight, he still inherited Superman's biofield. This biofield evenly distributed all the force he received throughout his body. Any attack, whether a thrust or a blunt object, unless the single force was several times greater than his, couldn't even break through his defenses. This was also why he could run silently. Enveloped in a biofield, he could also transfer the force from the ground to himself, protecting his surroundings from harm by absorbing both the action and reaction forces. With my current defense, ordinary pistols can't even pierce my skin, and I probably wouldn't die even if a rocket launcher hit my face. And this is only the first day. I expect to be immune to regular single-person weapon damage after another month of sun exposure. John silently assessed his strength level. Traveling at full speed, he quickly arrived at Fifth Avenue, which wasn't far to begin with. Chapter 5, Superman would never dress like Batman. New York, Fifth Avenue, outside Wells Fargo Bank. John performed a perfect somersault in midair, landing gracefully on a high-rise building opposite the bank. He then began to observe the surroundings. Wow, this is quite lively. He observed that over a dozen police cars had completely blocked all entrances and exits of the bank. A yellow cordon had also been set up 5 meters away from the bank. Even in the relatively peaceful city of New York, for a bank robbery of this magnitude, most of the city's police force had been deployed here, except for a few essential officers remaining on duty. John understood the tension among the crowd. After all, Marvel and Iron Man had only recently announced their existence, and the nerves of New Yorkers hadn't been properly tested yet. However, he believed that after experiencing a few more similar events, they would become more accustomed to it. George Stacy, who had just arrived at the scene, scratched the back of his head in frustration and asked the officer beside him, "What's the situation inside?" Reporting, "Chief, the incident happened 20 minutes ago. Because the robbers weren't very professional, and because we responded quickly, we've cornered all 7 criminals inside the bank. But there are 13 hostages inside the bank. The robbers have taken them all hostage. They're using the bank's internal surveillance and phone calls to demand not only a vehicle for their escape, but also $1 million in cash for each hostage. Furthermore, they're demanding that all their conversations be released to the media at any time, probably trying to manipulate public opinion by making people believe the hostages' lives matter, forcing us to agree. However, because one hostage was shot and killed during the resistance, now we only need to pay $12 million. Hearing his subordinate's report of a hostage's death, George felt even more troubled. He ordered sternly, "Get the negotiation experts up here first, then try to investigate the identities of these robbers. Also, get the snipers ready to assist us in eliminating the enemy if necessary." Someone died. Looks like we're too late. Hearing George's words from dozens of meters away, John sighed at the wasted effort. He then noticed that television station helicopters were approaching in the distance. Looks like I need to hurry. John became serious, and like a cannonball, He transformed into a black shadow, leaping silently onto the bank's rooftop before anyone noticed. The iron gate leading from the rooftop to the ground floor was now closed. John could clearly hear a heartbeat on the other side of the gate. Obviously, a robber was guarding it. Please, the guy on the other side isn't a hostage. Amen, John silently prayed, then took a deep breath and kicked out with all his might. With a loud crash, the iron gate caved in, slamming into the robber guarding it like a racing car, knocking him unconscious instantly. At the same time, John no longer controlled his speed, vaulting over the railing and leaping down in free fall. What's that sound? The 4 hostage-takers on the second floor, hearing the commotion, tried to look up, only to find a gloved right hand covering their faces and gently pinching them. The impact of John's fall knocked them unconscious. 2 done, no, 5, John muttered to himself. He then easily pulled 2 steel balls from his jacket pocket and flung them at the other 3 hostage-takers standing nearby. PFFT. 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 The terrifying penetrating power of the steel balls instantly pierced the bodies of the 3 hostage-takers, even piercing the pistols they were trying to pull out. From John kicking down the door to taking down the 5 men, the entire process took less than 7 seconds, with most of that time was wasted on the way downstairs. Only then did the intense pain erupt from the 3 men pierced by the steel balls, their heart-wrenching screams escaping their mouths, while the other hostages. Save your energy and wait for medical attention. Be careful not to bleed from your wounds if you get too excited, John joked, relaxing after rescuing the hostages. But the kidnappers, tormented by pain, paid no heed, continuing to wail desperately. The 12 bound hostages stood frozen in shock. From the moment one of them resisted and was shot dead, they had given up hope of being rescued on their own, only hoping the police outside would be quick to respond. Unexpectedly, instead of the police, a figure completely shrouded in black appeared. Are you here to rescue us? Great. We're saved. The men erupted in excitement, crowding around John. Since there are DC comics in the Marvel Universe, a little boy pointed at John in surprise and said, Batman? Little one, it's Superman. John corrected him helplessly. Liar. Superman in the movies doesn't wear all black, he's clearly wearing his underwear. The little boy's words were cut short as his mother covered his mouth. His mother said awkwardly, Mr. Superman, I'm sorry, the child doesn't know how to speak properly. It's alright, it's alright. John waved his hand, looking at the crowd. You guys wait here for a bit. There are 2 more robbers downstairs. I'll come up after I've dealt with them. With that, he pushed through the crowd and headed downstairs. To be honest, John had to admit these robbers were incredibly amateurish. They dared to rob a bank with just a few handguns, and the whole process dragged on until the police reacted and surrounded them. They had absolutely no plan. If he hadn't overheard that these people didn't even have any communication devices, and their phones weren't on to prevent any accidents, he wouldn't have acted so rashly. Meanwhile, the 2 robbers downstairs were still talking to the police, negotiating their terms. What? You're saying you're only willing to provide transportation, and we have to leave behind the money we stole? Damn it. Tom, a robber with black stockings over his head, stared at the monitor, phone in hand, and roared, Why do you think we robbed a bank? We had no money before the robbery, and we have no money afterward. Didn't I just rob a bank for nothing? Please calm down, Mr. Robber. Anger won't solve anything. Your demands are excessive. We can't possibly agree to everything. If you think our demands are unreasonable, we can continue to talk, the negotiation expert said calmly in a soothing tone. Calm down? What's there to calm down about? If you hadn't surrounded us, we wouldn't even have had to pay for the hostages. Tom sneered. Since you don't want to pay, fine, no problem at all. We don't want it either. The robber's sudden change in attitude completely stunned everyone present, including the police and reporters. The negotiation expert frowned and slowly said, Since you don't even want the ransom, what are your demands? No, how could I dare to have any demands? Since you said each hostage was worth 1 million, and reduced it to 12 million after one died, then as long as we kill all 12 of the remaining people, of course we won't have to pay you any money, the kidnapper said in a crazed tone. Chapter 6 introduces Spider-Gwen to her father. Hearing that the robbers planned to kill all the hostages, cold sweat instantly soaked the backs of everyone present. The negotiation expert immediately said in a somewhat hurried tone, Sir, please calm down. We will do our best to meet your demands. We will prepare the cash now. Now you know fear? It's okay, I understand you. This time, you only need to prepare 10 million. Tom said somewhat frantically. On the other end of the phone, George, hearing that the situation was getting out of control, immediately said, "Is the sniper in position? If the robbers start killing, abandon negotiations and immediately cooperate with us to break through head-on." Reporting, "Chief, the sniper is in position, but it seems we don't need him anymore." The reporting officer looked at the surveillance camera on the second floor of the bank and said with some surprise, "What do you mean?" George was about to ask when he immediately heard the painful screams of the robbers behind him. He immediately turned around and saw on the computer, on the bank's internal surveillance camera, that the two robbers who were originally wearing black stockings were now covered in blood, clutching their stomachs and lying on the ground in pain. Standing next to them was a man dressed in all black. "Who is this guy dressed like Batman?" Everyone present was stunned. John pointed his head at the surveillance camera, smiled, and said into the intercom, "Officers, you can prepare to close the net. All the robbers have been subdued." Although he didn't know who this Batman-like guy was, the current situation was in his favor. George immediately realized what was going on and led 7 or 8 of his men toward the bank. Meanwhile, the reporters nearby immediately realized that tomorrow's headline wouldn't be morning. NYPD's unlawful enforcement leads to the death of an innocent person, but rather shocking. Batman has arrived in my side. Just thinking about tomorrow's front page headlines and their promotions and raises, if it weren't for the police stopping them, they probably would have rushed forward eagerly. Over here, George had just stepped inside the police cordon when he saw the tightly closed door slowly being pulled open. The hostages who had been held captive were pouring out of the bank, while the man in black waved his hands, saying, "Over here, Officer George, don't worry, everyone's taken care of, it's safe." "Who are you? How do you know my name is George?" Chief George looked down at his chest. Only his badge number was visible, no name markings. Noticing the man's actions, John's heart skipped a beat. "Oh no, I'm about to be exposed," because they were neighbors, and John and Gwen were classmates. John had visited Gwen's house a couple of times. So he was naturally familiar with Chief George, and instinctively called him by name. In this situation, simply concealing his identity wouldn't work, so John decided to try a different approach, saying, "Of course, it's because your name is the same as a guy I know. Plus, he's on TV every day, so I remembered it." "Oh, what a coincidence. What's his name?" George asked, somewhat incredulous. "Of course, he's also called George, and he has a sister named Paige." John stopped abruptly, pretending to have accidentally revealed the information. George, meanwhile, secretly memorized the brother and sister pair, George and Paige. "As for who I am, you can call me Kryptonian," John declared. "Kryptonian?" "Yes, Kryptonian." John nodded. Although he had gained Superman's abilities, he felt he lacked the self-sacrificing spirit of Superman in the comics, as if he were under the influence of Kato Matsukami. Instead, without the system's restrictions, whoever wanted to do good deeds could do them. But since he had chosen to be a superhero, he naturally had to be careful with his name. If his name matched Superman's, public expectations of him might be raised, and if he made a mistake, public opinion would label him a talented but immoral superhero. But if he wasn't called Superman, but Kryptonian, expectations would naturally decrease, and even a slight transgression wouldn't cause too much of a problem. After all, Marvel wasn't without anti-hero characters, and no one would expect Iron Man to possess Superman's qualities. As the two men were talking, his two subordinates finished reporting the situation inside the bank and came over. "Chief, all 7 robbers are incapacitated. There are no casualties, but a few of them may be in mortal danger if they don't receive immediate medical attention." The officer glanced at the Batman in front of him. John waved his hand innocently, saying, "I've already held back as much as possible to restrain them without killing them." "They're robbers? You don't want to have it all, do you?" George shook his head, then said gently, "Of course not. We just need you to take off your mask and come back to the station with us to give us a statement. Kryptonians never take off their masks." John took a step back to create some distance, speaking seriously. "You should know how dangerous New York is. If my identity is exposed, not only me, but my family and even my friends George and Paige could die because of me." Seeing John's slightly agitated reaction, George quickly reassured him, "Hey, calm down. We guarantee the NYPD will protect your information. What do you have to protect it with? You're just a commissioner, not the President of the United States. Once my file appears in the police department, it's open to everyone above you. Do you think your superiors are all honest and upright? Or are you trying to use my family to get you to gamble? John retorted without hesitation. This left George speechless. After his retort, John put his arm around George with an air of familiarity, saying, I hope our cooperation is as seamless as Batman and Commissioner Gordon's. By the way, let me introduce you to a friend. With that, John waved towards the building across the street. Is he calling me? Spider-Gwen in the building across the street felt her heart race. Her father was right below, being embraced by this new acquaintance. Going down there would be a huge test for her heart, and if she were discovered, it wouldn't just be a matter of social death for her. After confirming that John below was indeed waving to her, Gwen hesitated for a moment, then swung in the air a few times before landing steadily in front of her father. Who is this guy who suddenly appeared? George wondered, looking at the girl in the tight-fitting clothes with a very voluptuous figure. John casually put his hand on George's shoulder and said, Chief George, let me introduce you. This is a friend I just met today. He's also interested in superheroes. Since we both want to do something for New York, I think we can exchange ideas and solve problems together in the future. Chapter 7 Kryptonians? Nemesis. Facing her father, Gwen waved her hand somewhat awkwardly and said, Director, you can call me Spider-Man. Nice to meet you. Do these people think fighting crime is some kind of fun? Hearing Gwen's energetic voice, George couldn't help but frown. Miss Spider-Man, you're still just a student, right? In that case, you should focus on your studies. You should think about your parents, how worried they would be if you got hurt. And as a student, is this outfit appropriate? Thinking of his high school daughter, George subconsciously took on the role of father, pointing at Gwen's figure-hugging clothes and saying this. If John, standing to the side, didn't know George was Gwen's father, he would have added, I hope you don't meddle. Even with a mask on, Gwen looked like a student being punished, obediently listening to her father's scolding. Actually, Miss Spider-Man's father is dead. John tried to convey a heavy feeling through his gestures. Huh? Gwen immediately put on a what are you talking about expression behind her mask. His entire family was killed by the mob a few months ago, and after Spider-Woman awakened her powers, she was determined to avenge them. So by day, he studies as a regular high school student, and by night, he's a vigilante, always ready to find the killer and get revenge. John said with a regretful expression. Hearing John's tragic story, George, remembering his earlier lecture, felt a pang of guilt and wanted to slap himself. I'm sorry, I didn't know you had such a tragic past. I shouldn't have judged you like that, but I still hope you can change your attire. George apologized to Gwen guiltily. Gwen, standing to the side, was completely bewildered. Me? Orphan's dead? They're right in front of me, and she's apologizing to me with such a guilty look. Seeing this comical scene, John's lips curled up slightly behind his mask. Of course, his reason for introducing Gwen to her father wasn't just to cause trouble. Since this was the Gwen universe, according to the plot, it wouldn't be long before George witnessed the death of Peter Parker, who had transformed into Lizard Man. Afterwards, he would mistakenly believe that Peter Parker was killed by Spider-Gwen, transforming into an anti-spider demon and relentlessly targeting her. John, of course, intended to try his best to prevent Peter's death. But if he couldn't stop it in the end, he wanted George to get to know his masked daughter beforehand. That way, even if things really happened, there would be a way out. With his help, he successfully made a good impression on Gwen in George's mind, and then John slipped her a piece of paper. Officer George, this is my number. Of course, it's anonymous. If you need any help in the future, just call me, and I promise I'll be there immediately. He then patted Gwen, who was fidgeting beside him, and said, Don't just stand there, follow me. It's still early, let's see what other good things we can do. After saying that, he suddenly leaped, jumping directly to the opposite high-rise building amidst the exclamations of the reporters. Spider-Gwen, as if granted a reprieve, immediately shot webs from her wrist to follow. George stared at the phone number in his hand, lost in thought. Although this guy's origins were unknown, he had indeed helped them. In addition, the various problems emerging in New York recently had gradually become beyond the scope of ordinary police officers like them. Many incidents were the kind that, if handled poorly, would become national news. So, At this moment, George was genuinely considering whether to call John if he encountered trouble. But before he could think for long, the reporters who had been waiting for a long time swarmed forward. "Chief, were the masked men earlier members of the mysterious official military? What's that masked man's title? Is the woman in the bodysuit who appeared later related to you?" These people stared at George with wide eyes, like hungry vultures. They practically wanted to shove the microphones in his mouth. Pointing at him like that, even George felt immense pressure and could only try his best to use official language to appease them. Inside the Daily Horn, Jameson, the editor-in-chief, was lying in a chair, anxiously awaiting news from his subordinates. "Oh, damn it, what's wrong with Nathan? Still no word. Is the robbery not over yet? I swear I'm cutting his bonus in half this month." Just then, the newspaper office door in front of him was suddenly pushed open. Nathan, whom Jameson had just complained about, rushed in excitedly, attracting everyone's attention. "Editor-in-chief, big news, absolutely big news." Seeing Nathan's excited expression, Jameson knew it must be good news, and his voice softened as he was about to roar, "Tell me more." The robbery was successfully solved. A masked man we'd never seen before subdued all 7 robbers without a single injury. "You mean a masked man? A new superhero? Do you have a picture?" Jameson's breathing quickened, already imagining tomorrow's newspaper headlines. "Of course. And we learned from the police he claims to be Kryptonian." Nathan handed over his camera, and the surrounding onlookers immediately gathered around, ready to watch the spectacle. "Kryptonian? He's watched too much DC. Why not Superman?" Jameson scoffed, looking at the photo on the camera. "Why is he masked? He looks more like Batman. Can't he be like the Superman in the comics? And who's this tight-fitting masked woman?" This woman came later, after everything was over. "She claims to be Spider-Man, so she's probably a superhero too," Nathan said. "Spider-Man, what a terrible name." Jameson chewed on the name, then said, "I know, let's call her Ghost Spider. As for that guy, we can't call him Kryptonian." "Why?" a reporter asked, puzzled. "Because it shares a name with DC Comics." "What if DC Comics demands royalties after tomorrow's news is published?" James said, "You all need to come up with a unique name right now." "Kryptonian? How about Kryptonian?" an Asian reporter suggested after coming up with a pun. "Kryptonian? Okay, this guy will be called Kryptonian from now on." James immediately made the decision, go all out. "I want these 2 guys on tomorrow's front page." The dozen or so newspaper staff who received the order immediately responded and began preparing to rush out tomorrow's Daily Bugle's front page headline. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8, It's reasonable for athletes to be more skilled, right? Early morning. John, who had been busy all night, looked speechlessly at the sensational headlines on the newsstand in front of him. Bank heist. The nemesis appears. Shocking. Police chief's mysterious deal with a stranger. Hostage, he's simply Superman. What's all this about? And what's with the nemesis thing? They might as well call him Batman. Puns are a no-no. John quickly scanned the newspaper, finally letting out a sigh of relief after reading it all. Aside from the odd headlines, the content wasn't too different. "I guess I'm famous now, but I don't have to show my face, so it's not a big deal," he thought dismissively. Actually, even if his identity were exposed, he wouldn't think much of it. After all, he was known as the New York Batman, with no ties or weaknesses in this world. Even if his identity were revealed, it would only cause a minor inconvenience. Looking away, John put his hands in his pockets and strolled leisurely towards school. The journey was uneventful until, at the doorway, a slender, pale hand rested on John's shoulder. "Hey, Kent." A vibrant voice came from behind John. He turned to see Gwen, whom he had parted ways with not long ago. "Gwen? What's up?" John frowned slightly, his tone distant. He couldn't understand why someone he wasn't usually close to had suddenly become so attentive. Was being a superhero too difficult, or what? Noticing John's somewhat distant tone, Gwen sighed. "You seem a little off lately, so I wanted to talk to you, but I couldn't reach you all day yesterday." "Off?" John chuckled, feeling her body thriving in the sunlight. I've never felt this good. You're being a bit sensitive. But. Alright, Gwen, John interrupted, instead of worrying about me, you should be concerned about Peter. Peter? Gwen was surprised, wondering how the conversation had turned to Peter Parker. Look, John said, tilting his head slightly towards the distance, your good friend is being bullied right now. Bullied? Gwen turned her head and saw her friend being pinned against the wall in a sorry state by a burly man. The perpetrator was none other than Thompson, a popular bully at school. Nearby, a number of onlookers had gathered, eager for a spectacle. Oh, Kent, looks like I'll have to help Peter first. Hey, where did he go? Gwen turned back and found that Kent, who had just been beside her, had disappeared. Then, a gasp came from the direction where Peter had been. She turned again and saw Thompson, who had been holding Peter down, now being lifted up by John with one hand by his collar. Thompson panicked when he was lifted up by one hand and said, John, what are you doing? Let go. He tried to pry John's hand off, but the right hand gripping his collar seemed like a block of iron, not even trembling. Thompson, classmates should be friendly, right? John said with a gentle smile. If it weren't for his actions, one might think they were having a friendly heart-to-heart talk. After struggling for a while and realizing he couldn't break free, Thompson had no choice but to give up. Alright, I promise, if this guy doesn't keep hanging around Mary Jane, I won't bother him anymore. Having received the promise, John released him, letting his legs touch the ground. Although he didn't know how John could be so strong, knowing the difference in strength between them, and not wanting to continue humiliating himself, Thompson pushed through the crowd and left alone. After Thompson escaped. Knowing there was no more entertainment, the students who had been watching scattered, but before leaving, they all looked at John with astonishment, never expecting this guy, who was somewhat famous in school, to be so strong. 0.114%, watching the progress bar jump forward by 0.001, John's smile became more genuine. Doing good deeds really does make people happy, he should keep up the good work. His gaze shifted to Peter Parker. Seeing the problem was solved, Peter adjusted his glasses and stood up. Thanks for your help, Kent. It's nothing. We're classmates. Next time you have a problem, you can come to me directly, I'll be happy to help. Hearing the progress bar's sound, John smiled slightly. John had a fairly good impression of Peter. After all, even when he turned evil, he was still a kind-hearted guy who only went clubbing and flirted with girls. He was very curious about what kind of tragic experience this kind-hearted guy had to have to turn evil and become a lizard man in this universe. Peter, are you alright? How did you get into trouble with Thompson? At this moment, Gwen, who had been watching John's admonition the whole time, stepped forward and asked with some concern. Peter was speechless when asked, unsure how to answer. Was he supposed to say that he got beaten up by Thompson because he liked Thompson's girlfriend, Mary Jane, and used the excuse of taking a picture to flirt with her? That would be too embarrassing. It's just a minor problem, it's my own fault, I can handle it. Because he couldn't bring himself to say the reason, Peter could only give a perfunctory answer. But this obvious excuse obviously wouldn't satisfy Gwen. Faced with her continuous questioning, Peter, somewhat overwhelmed, could only wave his hands repeatedly and leave under the pretext of having class later. Watching Peter leave helplessly, Gwen asked John, I really didn't realize you were so strong. As she spoke, she looked John up and down with an amazed gaze. Do I have to tell you I'm working out? John said nonchalantly, his hands in his pockets. Well, it seems you've been working out quite hard. Your physique is at least to the level of a sports prodigy. Gwen wasn't too surprised by this explanation of working out. After all, this was the Marvel Universe, where the average person's physical fitness level was extremely high. John's ability to lift someone with one hand was really not impressive. After all, there were people like Kingpin who reached Spider-Man's level through training. Alright, it's getting late. If you linger here any longer, do you want to be late for class in front of the whole class? I'm not waiting for you, I'm leaving. John waved his hand, interrupting Gwen, and walked towards the classroom. Seeing that John was so strong and didn't seem like someone who would cause trouble, Gwen, who had been worried that he might get into trouble, relaxed and temporarily gave up on paying attention to him. Chapter 9: The Firefighter's Confusion. After parting ways with Gwen, John strolled leisurely towards the classroom. Along the way, a slight smile played on his lips as he listened to the students' conversations. These students, in the prime of their youth, naturally paid far more attention to the latest news than other age groups. Coupled with the front pages of major newspapers, these trend-conscious young people were naturally discussing John's vigilante actions the previous night. However, their main focus wasn't on the pun's nemesis, but rather on the incredibly sexy ghost spider. Listening to their discussion, John thought to himself, sex is indeed the primary driving force. Arriving at the classroom, he sat down as usual, only choosing a spot where he could get direct sunlight. Soon after, the teacher arrived to begin the lesson. However, John's mind wasn't on the subject. After feigning attentive listening, his thoughts began to wander, planning for the future. Stark announced he was Iron Man 4 months ago, and I even made a fortune in the stock market because of it. Judging by the time, the second part's plot will start in a little over a month. I'll have to take time off to go to Monaco to catch up on the progress bar. Ugh. I'll skip sleep for the next month and just grind through the night. If I could cover all the crimes in New York, even without any other side hustles, I should be able to fill up the progress bar within a year. As John pondered, time gradually passed. After finishing his classes for the day, he immediately found a secluded corner, changed into all black clothes, and went out on patrol using the police eavesdropping equipment he hadn't yet returned to Gwen. New York time, 2 a.m. in an apartment building on Fifth Avenue, raging flames erupted. The towering flames, accompanied by thick smoke, illuminated the night sky as if it were daytime. And amidst this terrifying fire, terrified screams echoed from the high-rise building. Outside the apartment building, fire trucks had arrived. The firefighters, watching the out-of-control fire, were also somewhat apprehensive. With such a fierce blaze, even if they went in fully equipped, there was no guarantee they would escape unscathed. Ted, the leader of the firefighters, gritted his teeth and said, "Prepare the water pumps to keep supplying water. There are still people trapped inside. They won't last until the fire is extinguished. 2 of you come in with me to rescue them." "Who's coming with me?" "I'll go." A strong shout came from behind Ted. He wondered who had the courage to do that, and looked in the direction of the voice. He saw a man completely shrouded in black behind him. This man, dressed entirely in black, was carrying an unconscious man on his shoulder, his eyes looking at him through sunglasses. "And who are you?" Ted asked instinctively. "Some kind of superhero passing by," John said, tossing the man he was carrying on his shoulder like a sack over to him. "Keep an eye on him for me." Ted reflexively caught the man thrown to him, immediately being pushed back 2 steps by the force, almost falling to the ground. "Time is of the essence. Wait here for me a moment. I need to get the people out of the apartment first." "What are you trying to do?" "Don't get in our way." "Holy crap." Ted, who was about to yell at him, saw the man leap up the 20-meter-high building and, a few seconds later, carry 2 people out of the burning building. After rescuing the 2, the man didn't stop. Rushing back into the fire. After several trips in and out, soon 7 shaken men and women stood before Ted and the firefighters. Realizing the man wasn't there to interfere with the rescue, Ted was about to thank him when he saw the man in black skillfully take the high-pressure water hose from a firefighter. What do you want to do?" "There's no one else needing my help right now. I'm just killing time anyway, might as well put out this fire for you." "But, don't worry, I'm pretty good at fire safety. I know how to use a high-pressure water hose." "Is it a matter of knowing how to use it? Why are you so familiar with us? And you've done everything, what are we supposed to do?" Ted looked on, bewildered, as the man in black shouldered the high-pressure water hose and rushed into the building like a madman. Having been a firefighter for over a decade, his mindset was no different from the other firefighters around him. He was momentarily at a loss for what to do. While Ted was still in a daze, a firefighter who had been following the news approached and said, "Captain, isn't Lee the nemesis who solved a bank robbery yesterday?" After spending 10 minutes, John efficiently cleaned the entire apartment building. "The matter is perfectly resolved. Officers can go home and get a good night's sleep tonight. We'll cooperate again next time." Leaving the apartment building, John smiled and greeted the standing firefighters, then picked up the unconscious man from the ground and prepared to leave. Looking at the man carried on the shoulder of the man in black, one of the firefighters asked curiously, "What's wrong with him? Why are you carrying him around?" "Oh," John glanced at the man sleeping like a baby and said, "A robber I encountered on the road. I'm about to hand him over to the police. I remember the fire station and the police station are on the same route, or you could give me a ride." Ted, who finally found work, immediately agreed, Yeah, no problem. Okay, thank you. The robbery took place on Houston Street. The whole thing should have been captured on CCTV. We can check the footage and the evidence will be conclusive. John said, putting the man on his shoulder down. At this moment, John paused for a moment. It seems there's been another car accident on Bank Street. I'll go see if I can help. See you later. With that, with a loud bang, the man in black disappeared from the firefighter's sight like a blur. Damn it, we're late again. Not long after, a man carrying a camera on his shoulder got out of the car, cursed angrily, and then turned his attention to the group of firefighters. Hello, I'm a reporter from the New York Times. The fire that just happened was put out by John, right? That's right, but how did you know? Ted asked, somewhat puzzled. We've been following him all night, but he's been handling things faster than we can travel. By the time we arrived, he was already at his next destination. Do you know where his next target is? The reporter said, frustrated. After briefly interviewing the firefighters and survivors, he drove off again, following John's figure through the streets of New York. Chapter 10, A Little Superhero Shock for New Yorkers. On this day, the entire city of New York felt more clearly than ever before how much a superhero could change their lives. From 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 6 o'clock the next morning, the figure of the Nemesis roamed the streets and alleys of New York. From putting out fires and subduing robbers to finding cats and helping old ladies cross the street, his figure could be seen everywhere. And when he had free time, he would quietly lie on the roof of the tallest building in the vicinity. During his rest, if you were willing to go to the trouble of running to the top of the building, he would be happy to talk to you. During this time, if you had any questions for him, he would patiently give you advice. Ring ring. Accompanied by the piercing alarm clock, Gwen's consciousness was startled from her deep sleep. After slowly yawning, she opened her eyes and found that she had come home too late last night and hadn't even taken off her Spider-Man suit before going straight to sleep. After a quick wash, she went downstairs and had breakfast with her family. During the meal, her mother, Helen, casually turned on the TV. As soon as I turned on the TV, I saw a reporter standing in front of a charred building, microphone in hand, narrating. As you can see, the building behind me is relatively intact after the fire. According to survivors rescued last night, it was the Nemesis who saved them. According to statistics, from yesterday until now, the Nemesis has extinguished 1 fire, stopped 2 robberies, and fought 4 incidents. They also provided basic first aid to 4 seriously injured car accident victims and rushed them to the hospital. As the reporter spoke, a scene cut to the background. John, dressed in black, was seen carrying a huge white wooden plank, seemingly salvaged from somewhere, steadily and quickly carrying 4 unconscious victims towards the hospital. Helen watched with interest and said, "Not bad, looks like New York City has a new superhero. I've never seen a guy as active as him before," Sheriff George complained. Yesterday, they were always halfway through a call when they realized the case was solved, and the perpetrator was brought to the police station like this, once even by the fire department. One could imagine the mood of the officers on duty. But this drive probably won't last long. Once his enthusiasm fades, the citizens will realize that it's us cops who are protecting New York, George concluded, munching on his sandwich. "I don't think so," Gwen, who had been observing the whole time, retorted. "He might just keep going." "You know that?" George rolled his eyes at his daughter's naivete. Gwen fell silent. Should she say that she was also a superhero, but she hadn't expected that being a superhero would be so competitive? Last night, she was also looking for opportunities to rescue people, but she was always a step too late. By the time she arrived, the criminals had already been dealt with by John. After observing for a night, she felt that compared to herself, the buster was truly obsessed with his profession, performing good deeds like a routine task. What frustrated her the most was that she had been working for 2 days, and under the buster's intense competition, she hadn't even solved a single decent crime. It felt as if every time a criminal appeared, a John would pop up and take them down. If this nemesis keeps going like this, I'll have to move to another city to become a superhero. The scariest thing is, he spends the whole night fighting criminals. Doesn't he need to rest? Gwen thought to herself. That's enough for today, gotta go to school. John, who had been active all night, glanced at the progress bar and nodded in satisfaction. He then found a corner to change out of his all-black uniform and headed to school. In class, The entire class was discussing John's activity ranking in New York City the previous night. As the protagonist of their conversation, John quietly took out his laptop from his backpack in a corner and started checking flight tickets to Nice, France, a month from now. Under the sunlight, New York City seemed peaceful and serene, but in the shadows, a huge disaster was brewing. In a laboratory in New York, Professor Connors stared intently at the white mice inside the glass enclosure, their limbs regrowing. He excitedly wrapped his one remaining arm around Peter Parker, exclaiming, "Fantastic, Peter. The formula you gave me is perfectly correct. We just need to experiment a few more times to confirm it's harmless before we can test it on humans. Limb regeneration and cell enhancement. If everything goes smoothly, this drug could usher in a new era for all of humanity." Listening to the professor's explanation, a fighting spirit ignited in the eyes of the frail Peter, filled with anticipation for the life that would follow the drug's success. Meanwhile, in a dilapidated house in Russia, a weathered man named Ivan chugs down a shot of strong liquor, his gaze fixed on Tony Stark boasting to reporters on television. His dark pupils burned with fury before his gaze shifted to a pale blue drawing pinned to the wall. The drawing detailed the parameters of the arc reactor, with Stark Industries prominently displayed in the lower right corner. Behind Ivan, a tattered suit of armor, seemingly pieced together from scrap metal, emanated a pale blue glow from its chest. Ivan said coldly, "Tony Stark. I will use the blood of your Stark family to pay for my father's death." A month passed peacefully like this. During this month, the citizens of New York City had completely gotten used to the existence of a nemesis. Because John roamed the streets and alleys of New York City with super high activity every day, stealing the work of police officers, firefighters, FBI agents, DEA, Dennis Agency of America, and even neighborhood aunties. Except for a few hours of free time from Monday to Friday because of school, John had no entertainment or rest on weekends. He roamed the entire city of New York with the efficiency of 007, giving the city's crime scene a small superhero shock. Before this, no one had ever thought that superheroes could work so hard. Some even suspected that this guy was a tireless robot, or that the nemesis was actually a team, otherwise how could they operate so efficiently? But today, John decided to go on a business trip, leaving his loyal New York City. Before leaving, he needed to call Sheriff George's private phone to inform them in advance. Chapter 11 Leaving loyal New York City. Beep 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 beep. Early in the morning, Stacy's family was enjoying a cozy breakfast when the phone suddenly rang from George's pocket. Meeting his family's curious gazes, he silently pulled out his phone, and a contact named Masked Boy caught his eye. "George." After hesitating for a moment, he pressed the answer button, and a cheerful voice came through. "Good morning, Sheriff George. I'm so sorry to disturb your beautiful morning. I'm sure you're not in a good mood right now." Hearing the voice on the other end, the family members around them immediately looked over with curiosity. After all, George was a sheriff, and they hadn't heard anyone speak to him in such a tone for a long time. Gwen, with her excellent hearing, knew that the voice on the other end was none other than her nemesis, so she listened even more intently. Watched by his family, George felt his usual authority crumble and couldn't help but say, "Speak your mind, don't beat around the bush." Okay, actually, I've had a little thing going on lately, so I'd like to take a few days off. That's why I'm asking for your permission." John walked down the streets of New York, a smile playing on his lips. His handsome face and sunny disposition made the girls around him flutter involuntarily. "You're not my subordinate. You can take a break whenever you want. Why are you asking me for leave?" George raised his voice. "I was just thinking that if I suddenly left, you might be caught off guard, so I wanted to give you some time to prepare." "No need. Even without you, our excellent NYPD officers can handle crime. So you don't need to notify us in advance." Thinking of the recent media mockery of the police department, George felt a surge of anger. Okay, don't be so hasty. I'm not in a hurry." Even through the phone, George couldn't help but stand up. "See, you're in a hurry again." John's lips curled up again. George was about to say something when his son's eyes lit up. "Dad, is it Nemesis? I've always wanted his autograph. Can I talk to him?" Looking at his younger son's expectant eyes, George finally sighed and said, "My son really admires you, and now he wants to talk to you." George handed over his phone, which his younger son immediately took. "Hello, Nemesis. My classmate has always admired you, and of course, so do I. So, can I get an autograph?" Of course, no problem. I'll bring you one when I come back from my vacation. When you see me in the newspaper again, just ask your dad for it, John said with a smile. After chatting for a while, John hung up the phone with a smile, got into a taxi, and said, to JFK Airport. Meanwhile, after the call ended, Gwen asked curiously, Dad, are you still in contact with the nemesis? He forced his number on me, and he keeps calling to chat. I can't do anything about it, George complained. And I suspect he probably knows me in real life, otherwise he wouldn't have called me by name the first time we met. The nemesis knows George in real life? The family members present couldn't help but lean with gossip. Knowing he was being nosy, George quickly stopped himself, not saying another word, much to their disappointment. The Principality of Monaco, the second smallest country in the world, is located in southwestern Europe, surrounded by France on three sides. In Monaco, there is an F1 circuit called Monte Carlo, where countless rally teams race at high speeds every year. Due to the unique environment, residents of the city can often see the high-speed traffic rushing past just by looking out their windows. Today, at the Monaco Grand Prix of the Formula One World Championship, a special driver walked onto the track. Iron Man. Everyone, both inside and outside the track, gasped in surprise upon seeing Tony Stark in his racing suit. They had never imagined he would participate in such a race. Was he courting death? At a banquet not far from the track, Stark's girlfriend, Potts, after a moment of stunned silence, immediately called out, Natalie, Natalie. Yes, Ms. Potts. Do you know about this? Potts pointed to Tony on the screen. Natasha, who had also noticed Tony on the live stream, looked equally bewildered and said, I've never heard of this before either. Although he didn't know what was happening off the track, Tony, knowing his girlfriend's personality, was certain that he would be met with her accusations once he got off the track. However, weakened by palladium poisoning, he didn't care about such things. Tony, in his racing suit, floored the accelerator. As the 5 turn signals flashed and went out, he skillfully started the car, just as always. Everything went perfectly. Even though he wasn't a professional racer, his successful launch start put him on par with the other cars. All he needed to do was finish the race smoothly. Wait, who's that guy? Stark, who had just finished a lap, spotted a man in orange overalls, a toothpick dangling from his mouth, casually standing in the center of the track around the corner. Not only him, but the man's entrance was instantly captured by cameras and broadcast live to everyone watching the race. Just as everyone was wondering if this man was asking for trouble, a visible electric current instantly burned the man's orange overalls to charcoal. 2 silver lightning whips, gripped by the burly man and powered by his makeshift exoskeleton armor, were lashed out at a blue and white race car. The owner of this car was none other than his enemy, Tony Stark. With a sharp swoosh, like a hot knife through butter, the lightning whip sliced the 3-meter-wide metal car in two without any resistance, much to the horror of the spectators. The car was torn apart and flew to both sides, but Ivan couldn't help but frown after doing all this. Tony Stark had miraculously dodged that lightning whip strike perfectly, without sustaining any damage. Finally made it, John exhaled softly from the edge of the chaotic stands. To avoid being identified, he first flew from New York to Nice, France, and then ran across the border to Monaco. Looking at the chaotic situation below, he timed his move perfectly, first finding a secluded corner without surveillance to change into his usual black uniform, and then preparing for his dazzling entrance. Chapter 12: A Day Without My Nemesis. Today, another vicious armed robbery of a jewelry store occurred in the usually peaceful and honest city of New York. After receiving the call, Officer Irwin couldn't help but say to his colleague, "Are these suspects crazy? Don't they know what day it is? Why do they have to choose this time to commit crimes?" Huh? Tom, a newly recruited officer, didn't immediately understand Irwin's meaning. "Don't forget, it's the weekend," Irwin emphasized. "You mean John's nemesis? What else? Everyone knows that guy works tirelessly on weekends, cracking down on crime. Do these people not care about the day they commit crimes?" Irwin chuckled. "You're right," Tom nodded in agreement. Thanks to exaggerated media reports, all of New York knew John's work hours. Now, on weekends, New York City's crime rate is 90% lower than before. Conversely, the crime rate during weekday working hours, which used to be the lowest and no one dared to choose, has slightly increased, as if criminals are clocking in to commit crimes. After all, avoiding danger is a biological instinct. Knowing John's work hours, Premeditated crimes will generally avoid coinciding with his call times. Officers Owen and Tom drove their patrol car through the streets, searching for the criminal who had just robbed the jewelry store. Seeing Tom's tense expression, Owen couldn't help but smile and reassure him, "Don't be so nervous. Today should be like any other day. Once we're halfway there, the criminal will be brought to the police station by killer." Reassured by Owen, Tom relaxed a little, and after searching for over 10 minutes, they successfully encountered the armed robber. After a brief gunfight, Tom, clutching his wounded shoulder, silently watched the robber, handcuffed with silver bracelets, lying on the ground. "Wait a minute, where is killer?" Owen asked, pushing the robber into the patrol car. Could there be other cases elsewhere? Where was killer? This question had been troubling the entire NYPD since this morning. On John's first day away from New York, the workload, which had been reduced by almost 99% after John took over the weekend, was gradually returning to overwhelm the NYPD. Fortunately, initially, no one outside the police department noticed this. So on the first day, New York City remained relatively calm, maintaining its extremely low crime rate. This made things relatively easy for the police. But soon, in the evening, a news article titled "The Vanished Nemesis" trended on New York City's social media, and the city's residents began to realize something was wrong. Everyone in New York City instinctively thought, "Nemesis, it seems he really didn't come out yesterday." As more and more people noticed John's disappearance, some residents remarked, "Looks like Nemesis is finally tired." Of course, the most excited were the other superheroes in New York City. With John, the king of online fraud, gone, the other street heroes could finally show off their skills. Gwen even managed to surpass her total sales for the entire previous month on Saturday. Congratulations. Of course, the underworld of New York City also noticed this, but they weren't overly excited. After all, Nemesis was just absent, not dead. If someone thought they had a chance to commit a crime and acted impulsively, they might just run into Nemesis returning from his rest. So, in the eerie silence, Saturday in New York City created a situation where superheroes were in a frenzy, while criminals were in a slump. But this situation was quickly broken, because with John's departure, the citizens of New York began to pay attention to other superheroes. Coincidentally, news of Iron Man appearing in Morocco caught the attention of New Yorkers. Tony, a local hero and currently more famous than John, was up to his old tricks online, immediately drawing the attention of the crowd back to the racing live stream. Then they saw, during the thrilling race, another guy with a reactor like Iron Man appeared and whipped Iron Man's car in two. Afterwards, he chased Stark, who was without his Iron Man armor, all over the track like a dog. "Damn it, this guy is still chasing me." Tony was being chased around the track by Ivan, anxiously thinking, "Where is Happy? Hurry up and save him." As Tony prayed, Happy arrived late in a luxurious black sedan. In the instant the two crossed paths, a red, portable armored vehicle, the size of a briefcase, was thrown out of the window. Stark, nearly bursting with joy upon seeing the armor, seemed to hear a notification sound in his ear: cheat code acquired. After dodging Ivan's lightning whip once more, he immediately stomped on the armor, thinking viciously, "Everyone get out of the way, it's my turn to show off." But before he could even put on the armor, a black figure leaped from the stands, then landed with a thud dozens of meters in the air, blocking his path between Tony and Ivan. "Who's this guy?" Tony and Ivan both froze, staring at the black-coated man in the middle. But as this scene was broadcast live online, all the New Yorkers watching couldn't help but exclaim, "Holy crap, it's the Nemesis." At that moment, all of New York knew that the Nemesis wasn't on the streets of New York at all, but on a business trip to Morocco. Yes, all of New York, including all the city's criminals. The news was like a gamer being told about a limited-time event. All the criminals in New York City were on the move. The event description read, "The Nemesis is currently abroad and won't be back for a while. Villains, quickly raise your weapons and set New York City ablaze." As for the superheroes, they had just spent a day and a night in New York City without the Nemesis, and most were currently sleeping in their apartments. Perhaps when they woke up, they would find a big surprise waiting for them. John, far away in Morocco, was clearly unaware of the small impact his butterfly effect would have on New York City. At this moment, he was looking at the people he had separated to his left and right. John turned to Tony and said lightly, "Mr. Tony Stark, you can rest now. After everything is over, I'd like to talk to you. I hope you don't mind." "Mind?" I mind a lot, Tony, interrupted from his pretentious act, wanted to say. Chapter 13 Solving the Whiplick. Inside the Monaco Stadium, Tony Stark stared at the man in black with a look of utter frustration, as if he'd been humiliated. He'd been beaten up since the start, finally managed to get his armor, and now the man was handing it all over to him? He'd been beaten for nothing. Having his bravado stolen was worse than death for Tony. Just as he was about to retort, the man in black suddenly said, "You don't want anyone else to know about the target's poisoning, do you?" "How do you know?" Tony's expression changed slightly. "Because I've seen Iron Man too," John thought to himself, then said, "If you want to know about your father's inheritance, we can talk about it after the fight." Father's inheritance, Tony wanted to press further, but was immediately interrupted by Ivan's whip. Seeing Tony and the man in black chatting so enthusiastically, Ivan, driven by revenge, showed no mercy and lashed out with his lightning whip at the two of them without hesitation. The lightning whip crackled and hissed as it rubbed against the air, capable of tearing anything it touched. John, not wanting to test the whip's strength with his own body, leaped back without hesitation, pulling Stark away from its range. "Now is not the time to talk. I'll borrow this for now, don't worry, I'll return it." "Borrowed what?" Tony was startled, then saw the Mark V armor he was standing on being pulled off by the man in black, who then charged at Ivan. "Hey, you don't have permission, you can't use the armor," Stark hurriedly warned. Seeing the man in black rushing towards Ivan, and knowing he possessed something he wanted to know, Stark was about to order Jarvis to grant him temporary access. But the next moment, he saw the man in black actually swing the Mark V armor at the lightning whip. Sizzle! The moment the armored suitcase and the lightning whip collided, the whip, which had previously sliced through gold and jade with ease, only left a faint mark on the suitcase before being immediately swayed aside by the immense force of the suitcase carrying tens of tons of weight. Wandifa? Stark was dumbfounded. He would never have imagined such a use. He had assumed John was using the armor to wear, but the stark reality told him that the man in black was using it as a club. Not only him, but Ivan and the arms dealers were also somewhat bewildered by this practice of using a sniper rifle as a stick. Although it was indeed effective, it was somewhat of a waste. But the other spectators didn't care about any of that, they were just enjoying the spectacle. With his successful home run, cheers that resounded throughout the stadium echoed from the stands. John swung the alloy case in his hand and smiled at Ivan. "You have no chance of winning. It's better for everyone if you surrender sooner." Ivan snorted coldly and swung the whip in his hand without hesitation. With the help of the rudimentary exoskeleton armor, a single strike would at least tear John's outer garment. Too slow, John watched the whip slowly whirling towards him in the air, completely uninterested. Although his opponent had the support of an exoskeleton and his strength was barely equal to his own, his opponent was just a mortal. If he were too fast, his entire body would fall apart. What seemed like an inescapable whip to an ordinary person was like a sumo wrestler in a wheelchair to him. It was like that famous joke that someone actually tried to shoot a speedster head-on with a bullet. Since his opponent didn't want to surrender gracefully, John had no choice but to go to the trouble of helping him surrender. Grabbing the suitcase, John easily shook off the whip with a clang, and then, to Ivan's somewhat fearful gaze, instantly covered a distance of 4 or 5 meters. By the time Ivan realized what was happening, his neck was already firmly gripped, and he was lifted up, a series of crisp clanging sounds of metal hitting the ground filling his ears. Looking down, he saw that John had dismantled his entire armor into parts, and the core reactor had been crushed into scrap metal and tossed aside. After removing Ivan's armor, John gently set him down, then considerately brushed some dust off his clothes. Honestly, coming alone for revenge this time was rather hasty. "Try harder next time," John said earnestly, patting Ivan on the shoulder. "What?" Ivan was a little confused. "Nothing, I was just saying you were great," John praised, giving him a thumbs up, but Ivan felt like he was being sarcastic. Watching Ivan angrily being dragged away by the belatedly arriving police, John didn't stop him. After all, if he killed him here, who would give him missions in the future? Just like the no-kill rule for heroes in DC Comics, John didn't want to kill these villains unless absolutely necessary. Compared to superheroes, he valued the supervillain's usefulness more. After all, superheroes would compete with him for progress, while supervillains would create progress for him. In his eyes, these guys were all good people. The bigger the trouble they caused, the better, as it would help him level up. As for those who died because of these villains' mischief, please, what did that have to do with him? He could just show up and save them later, right? John thought to himself. System, display progress bar, 7.017%, 9.217%. Looking at the progress bar, John was somewhat dissatisfied. Hey, system. Seriously? How come defeating Ivan only increased it by 2.2%? This guy is supposed to be a major villain who dominates an entire movie, and this is all I got? That's only a little over a week's worth of work. Host, the progress bar doesn't calculate the enemy's strength, but rather the impact you caused. For example, if a nuclear bomb that could destroy a city of millions explodes, according to its original trajectory, thanks to the efforts of other heroes, it would only result in 5 deaths, and if your intervention saves everyone, but in the end you only gain progress for those 5 people, because if you don't save the others, plenty of others will. Even if you did nothing this time, the final result would still be Iron Man defeating Whiplash. Your intervention only saved the lives of a few racers. 2.2% is already quite generous. If that's the case, then in almost every Marvel movie, the final result is the protagonist defeating the villain. Doesn't it mean I worked for nothing? You could say that, host. You. Fine, I understand. John was a little annoyed, but didn't dwell on it. After all, what the system said didn't seem wrong. Even if you were a piece of char siu, it wouldn't affect the final result. So, because I didn't kill the villain, and he causes damage later, will that affect my progress bar? No, because you're just following the law. According to principle, the law only gives you the right to kill villains when facing them, not that it's your obligation. So not killing them is just following the law, it won't deduct progress. This system is actually more suitable for those dark and gritty worldviews. Marvel's family-friendly ending, where good triumphs over evil, actually limits its potential, John muttered to himself. Just as he was thinking, Stark, seeing that the matter was over, walked over with a sour face and said, "Now you can talk about my father." Of course. John composed himself and said, "You know the Strategic Homeland Defense, Attack and Logistics Agency, right? Your dad was one of the founders. As long as you tell that one-eyed bald guy you want what your dad left you, they won't refuse. In the Legacy, there's a miniature city model, actually a new element model. After removing the unnecessary things, you'll know how to use it to save yourself." John didn't hesitate to spoil the plot. Chapter 14 Identity Exposed. A new element? A flicker of shock crossed Stark's eyes. If it were true, then the target poisoning might actually be a solution. But how do you know so much? You don't need to worry about that, but there's something I've always been curious about, John asked. What is it? The reason your condition worsened was because the energy you used to absorb the shrapnel in your chest wasn't clean, and it was also powering the suit, which hastened your death. So what's the problem with that? Tony spread his hands. Then why didn't you use 2 energy systems, one to power the suit, and the other to power your chest with some other low-quality clean energy? Did you not like it? John asked. This was a question that had been bothering him since watching the movie. Tony. So you never thought of this solution? Tony. Okay, I won't ask any more. John wisely kept quiet. Actually, it's quite simple. Throughout the second movie, Tony didn't tell anyone about the target poisoning problem, he kept it all to himself. If it weren't for the emergence of a new element, he probably would have taken this matter to his grave. Just then, Stark's girlfriend, Potts, arrived and gratefully extended her hand to John, saying, "Thank you so much for your help this time, Nemesis." "It's nothing," John replied, shaking her hand with his black-gloved right hand and handing her the Iron Man armor and his contact information. "He's not used to accepting things from others, so I had to trouble you to take them. Here's my contact information. If you need anything similar next time, just call me, and I'll try my best to get there," John said with a smile. He actually had 2 purposes for coming. First, to enter the Iron Man instance and see if he could get more progress, since farming events definitely yielded more progress than daily quests. Second, to establish contact with Iron Man. This guy had participated in all the main story instances, including Iron Man Trilogy and Avengers 1-4, so becoming more familiar with him would make it easier to intervene in events later. After Potts accepted the armor, John said goodbye and left under the gaze of everyone present. Not far from the two, Natasha's aliased assistant spoke to Nick Fury on the helicarrier through a miniature earpiece. "Director, the Nemesis has left. He spoke with Stark beforehand, but the distance is too great, we don't know the specifics. It's alright, just keep following Stark. Later, we just need to have a speech expert analyze Stark's lip movements in the live stream to figure out what he was talking about. Nick Fury looked at John, who was shrouded in black, in the live stream and muttered to himself, the question now is, how did he get here? Is it really just a coincidence? Before this, he only knew that a very active street hero had emerged in New York, but he didn't know much about him. He never expected that he would make contact with their key target, Tony Stark. Nick looked at Callison beside him, bring me the detailed information on the Nemesis. I need to understand it. 10 minutes later, all the external information about the Nemesis, including newspapers, audio, and video, was placed in front of Nick Fury, which he roughly browsed through from beginning to end. 2 hours later, after finishing reading, Nick Fury wearily pinched his philtrum. Kryptonian? A DC fan. His ability is superhuman physical strength, but when he fights, he causes minimal environmental damage. Suspected special ability. Just as he was pondering this, a mechanical voice came through his earpiece. Mr. Nick Fury, please answer the phone beside you. Nick Fury turned his head and saw his phone ringing. The contact name was Tony Stark. Upon answering, Stark's familiar, irritating voice immediately came through. Hey, Nick Fury, right? You seem to have stored something my father gave me here. As he spoke, on the private jet, Stark looked at Nick Fury's portrait with a strange expression, just like that guy said, a one-eyed bald-headed guy. Nick Fury's left eye flickered slightly. How did you know? Stark didn't want to reveal his nemesis status to an agent like Nick Fury, so he lied. I found out using Jarvis, of course. Nick Fury didn't believe him at all. Hacking his own phone was one thing, but if Jarvis could break through SHIELD's firewall, why would Stark have waited until today to come knocking? But he didn't show it. He had some guesses about who leaked the information, and he also planned to give Stark the things left by the other party's father, so he agreed without hesitation. But after the call ended, Nick Fury's face turned serious, and he immediately said to Callison, who was working beside him, call the information investigation team over immediately. We may have been infiltrated. 5 minutes later, the 15-person information investigation team on the helicarrier immediately gathered in front of Nick Fury. Nick Fury said seriously, immediately retrieve the flight lists of all flights from New York to Monaco within the last 2 days, and screen for males aged 15 to 40. Compare their schedules to those of the Nemesis who frequents New York. Because Monaco is a small country, the target is relatively small. Half an hour later, looking at the investigation results, Nick Fury's brow furrowed even more. Callison suggested, should we broaden the gender and age range of the investigators? Maybe the target is a woman. No, maybe I'm mistaken. Nick Fury thought for a moment and then said, expand the investigation to neighboring France. Start by checking the cities in France closest to Monaco. France? Callison was somewhat puzzled. Nick Fury explained, as far as I remember, Nice, the nearest city in France, is only 19 kilometers away from Monaco. If the Nemesis wants to, he can easily go to France first and then run to Monaco. Sure enough, half an hour later, the investigation team found the first New York to France flight passenger whose schedule did not conflict with the Nemesis's. A portrait of a handsome young man named John Kent was presented to Nick Fury. A smile crept across Nick's dark face. Based on my years of experience as a special agent, this should be the guy. Thoroughly investigate his internet browsing history for the past month. Soon, John's recent browsing history was uncovered. A series of entries in his search history caught the attention of Nick Fury and Callison. Countries near Monaco, the Monaco Grand Prix of the Formula One World Championship, the French city closest to Monaco, flights from New York to France. Seeing this almost explicit identification, Nick Fury again ordered, immediately compare John Kent's height and audio data with that of the Nemesis, provide discrepancies, and investigate all of his past. After giving the order, all information about John Kent online, from his birth certificate to his awards in his youth, was investigated by the SHIELD team. Soon, detailed information about John's early life was delivered to them. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15 John's Past. John Kent was born in New York City, New York. His father, Pan Kent, and mother, Shaw Mary, jointly ran a company, so John Kent enjoyed a privileged upbringing. However, due to his precocious nature, he didn't interact much with his peers. But when Kent was 13, his parents' company went bankrupt due to mismanagement, and his parents, overwhelmed by debt, committed suicide, leaving John alone. Hearing this, Carlson, looking at the information, paused, somewhat worried about the boy's future. After a liquidation of assets, John successfully left with nothing, leaving no property or personal funds. He was initially intended to be fostered by other relatives, but he resolutely refused. A week later, in a school mock exam, John's grades improved from the middle of the class to first place. He then used his exceptional speaking skills to sell anxiety, gaining the approval of the parents of struggling students in his class, securing room and board plus a monthly tutoring fee of $1,000, and successfully survived. Carlson scratched his head, surprised by this tactic, and then continued reading. With John's help, he successfully improved the struggling student's grades and earned his first pot of gold through tutoring. Then, on September 6 of the same year, he participated in the Global Tetris Championship. Tetris competitions? Nick Fury asked instinctively. A member of the technical team who knew a little about it replied, yes, and the prize money is a whopping $2 million. Carlson continued reading. In this Tetris competition, John successfully won first place and received the $2 million prize. The reason for his success wasn't that his skills were more proficient than other players, but rather that he pioneered a method no one had ever tried before. With what he called hyperdipping, he raised the bar for all professional Tetris players. What's hyperdipping? Carlson looked at the agent who had interrupted earlier. Unexpectedly asked, the agent thought for a moment before saying, simply put, compared to the previous one-handed DOS technique, hyperdipping requires both hands to tap the direction keys at an ultra-high frequency of 12 times per second. This can increase movement speed by 20%. Oh. Carlson nodded, seemingly understanding, and then continued reading. After winning this year's championship, John Kent announced on the podium that he had a brand new technique to improve Tetris efficiency, and he would privately teach anyone who offered $3 million. This statement naturally caused a huge uproar among Tetris players, but no one was willing to pay the exorbitant price. The following year, John participated in the Tetris competition again. After last year's victory and declaration, he gained a lot of attention, and everyone was eagerly anticipating his new technique. Because his victory last year was due to his groundbreaking technique, after he revealed the details of the technique, all the professional players this year learned it, and he had no advantage in terms of proficiency. So without the emergence of new technologies, he might not have even made it into the top 10 this year. The result was as everyone expected. In his second competition, he completely crushed all other competitors in his group with his brand new Tetris technique, rolling, winning the $2 million prize again. What's rolling? Carlson asked again. The technician hesitated, then said, the specific technique is very complex. Anyway, compared to the hyperdipping technique from a year ago, rolling is about 300% more efficient. Wow! Carlson couldn't help but exclaim, surprised that a game like Tetris had so many intricacies. After achieving financial freedom, John Kent's life was uneventful. He occasionally bought stocks, sometimes donated money to charity, and went to school as usual, nothing dramatic. Until a month ago, he suddenly became a nemesis for unknown reasons. A very inspiring life, Carlson said with a smile. After reviewing John's information, he had a good impression. His past is indeed clean, but that makes it even harder to explain why he suddenly went to Monaco and told Stark about his father's inheritance. Nick Fury frowned. So should we send someone to investigate? Like Stark? Hawkeye, who had appeared unnoticed, asked. It's difficult. His life is very regular, he's either at school or fighting crime. A stranger suddenly appearing in his life is tantamount to telling him he's been discovered, Nick Fury said. He might be related to the massive shift in dark matter in the universe 20 years ago, Nick Fury guessed, but didn't say it aloud. List him as a key target for observation, but don't send anyone to follow him directly. Just know his daily movements, Nick Fury said. On the first-class flight from France back to New York, John, unaware that he had been thoroughly investigated, was using this rare break to read a book. Just as Nick Fury's investigation had revealed, at the age of 13, Due to the death of his parents, he had to give up his leisurely life as a rich kid and start working for himself. With the knowledge from his previous life that was years ahead of this world, and the intelligence of an adult, John could essentially make money by capitalizing on information asymmetry, provided he used it wisely. Hypertipping, the Tetris technique, only appeared in 2018 in his previous life, and rolling didn't emerge until 2022. Therefore, John only needed simple practice to easily surpass those outdated techniques. Afterwards, with the initial $4 million he earned from the competition, his understanding of the times would allow him to make money effortlessly. If my parents in this life had been willing to talk to me instead of abandoning me to jump off a building, they wouldn't have died so young, John recalled, a fleeting look of contempt for his irresponsible parents crossing his eyes. In contrast to John's current calm, New York City was gradually becoming noisy. As John's appearance in Monaco was broadcast live to New York, all the supervillains knew that their nemesis couldn't return immediately. Immediately, someone investigated flights from Monaco to New York online and concluded that unless John moved at supersonic speeds, even if the nemesis returned by plane, it would take at least a day. This well-reasoned analysis not only propelled the tweet to the top of the trending list, but also stirred the hearts of potential criminals. Soon, a clash between police and criminals, good and evil, erupted in the New York City night. Chapter 16 Kingpin. Late at night, the tranquility of New York City was shattered by a gunshot. A group of heavily armed robbers used homemade explosives to blow open the blast doors of a bank, skillfully stealing a large sum of cash before making their escape. This marked the first major crime in New York City. After John's frequent calls to police in recent days, some criminal groups that had been preparing to commit crimes chose to lie low and wait for an opportunity, rather than act during this challenging period. When news of John's departure from New York was leaked, these high-risk criminal groups quickly realized their chance had arrived. Late that night, New York City's banking industry suffered a major blow. 3 banks were bombed overnight. One of them, perhaps due to bad luck, was targeted by 2 different groups simultaneously, nearly leading to a shootout over the loot. As the night of crime began, the entire New York City police force was mobilized, but due to the large number of banks being robbed at the same time, they were overwhelmed. Even more terrifying was that beneath this massive crime, a vast number of previously low-level criminals began to stir. Taking advantage of the police's inability to effectively combat crime, a large number of low-quality criminal reservists began engaging in free shopping sprees, further fueling local crime activity. As for the other street heroes of New York, after a day of fighting crime, they had long since returned home to sleep, exhausted from a day of activity. Even those few who hadn't rested were powerless to suppress the riots in a frenzied New York City. That night, gunfire erupted in the streets of New York, and due to the police shortage, the military was even deployed to quell the unrest. The next morning, Gwen awoke from her slumber, her steps light as she recalled the previous day's exploits. After washing up, she went downstairs for breakfast, only to find that her father hadn't come over. "Mom, why didn't Dad come down?" she asked, puzzled. "There was chaos in Brooklyn and Queens all night. I heard the army was called in." "He didn't come home all night, he was out working," Helen said, her brows furrowed with worry for her husband, but Gwen was stunned. What could have happened last night that required the army to be deployed? Because her father was the police chief, their family was relatively wealthy, and the area they lived in had good security, hardly anyone would be foolish enough to cause trouble. The chaos occurred in those poor neighborhoods that were already unsafe and relied on government subsidies. It was too far away for Gwen to notice anything unusual all night. To find out more, Gwen quickly finished her breakfast and went back to her bedroom to check on her computer. Then she was shocked to discover that the chaos last night had almost broken New York City's historical records. All sorts of crimes were rampant, drawing the attention of almost the entire world. And even now, the situation in New York City hadn't completely calmed down. A large number of criminals were still roaming around the city. As someone aspiring to become a qualified superhero, Gwen couldn't ignore such a problem. Without hesitation, she changed into her Spider-Man suit and dialed her school teacher's number. "Hey, Mr. James, I'd like to ask for a day off today. I'm not feeling well." "Why are you asking for a day off too?" James's voice came from the other end of the line, sounding puzzled. "Me too? Is someone else asking for a day off like me?" "Of course. Kent came to see me last Friday, saying he wanted to go out for a few days, so he asked for 2 days off. Teacher James explained, "If you're not feeling well, you should rest at home for a day. The area isn't very safe today, so staying home is fine." With that, James hung up the phone, but his words caused a huge uproar in Gwen's mind. Kent is taking a day off. Gwen thought of Kent's far above average physical abilities and her father's speculation that the nemesis might know her, and exclaimed in surprise, "Could it really be such a coincidence?" The girl paused for a moment, then realized that the focus shouldn't be on Kent's hidden identity. That could be investigated later. She should concentrate on crime outside the city. Composing herself, she flipped out the window, then leaped through the air in a graceful arc before swinging down onto a web towards the lower-class neighborhood. Meanwhile, atop a skyscraper, a tall, stout man leaned on a black cane, his head slightly bowed. His gaze swept over New York City from above, as if surveying his own kingdom. Behind him, a man in a suit and tie reported nervously, "Boss, your orders have been carried out. Most of our men were dispatched last night, but because of the military deployment, many were arrested, resulting in significant losses." "It doesn't matter." Hearing about the heavy losses, the man was unconcerned. "That nemesis has gotten a bit cocky. If it were just minor trouble, I wouldn't have bothered, but he's crossed the line. Looks like Kingpin's name has been dormant for too long. Any Tom, Dick, or Harry dares to show up. Notify Tombstone. When the nemesis reappears, eliminate him." Kingpin commanded coldly. "Yes, boss." After killing the nemesis, remember to expose his identity. "Let everyone know that in New York, no one can be so arrogant," Kingpin said, turning around. The imposing presence of his 2.5-meter tall frame was like a giant brown bear standing before you, sending chills down your spine. New York City, finally back. At JFK Airport, John stretched after disembarking, then pulled his phone from his backpack, immediately noticing the missed calls. "What's going on? Is New York in chaos? Chief George actually called me." John looked at the contact's name, surprised. He dialed back, and after a couple of seconds, the call was answered. George's voice came through. "Are you in New York now?" I'm here." "What's the problem?" George didn't answer directly, but said, "There was a riot in New York City last night, at least 1,000 crimes." What a coincidence. John's eyes lit up instantly, but were quickly overshadowed by a pang of regret. If he had known New York City was so chaotic last night, he wouldn't have bothered going to Monaco. John was still unaware that the source of this incident was him, the little butterfly that caused it. If he hadn't left, New York might not have been in so much trouble. In just a few words, John understood George's meaning, so he didn't ask any more questions and laughed. "Chief, I understand, I'm coming right now." George. Seeing many readers' complaints, let me clarify, the Kingpin here isn't the Daredevil version from the movies, but the Kingpin from the animated film Spider-Man, Across the Universe. In the movies, Kingpin's pure power is shown in his ability to shatter glass from tens of meters away, overwhelming the original Spider-Man. And he'd be the kind of character who could be strangled on the spot if his family hadn't interfered. He's known as Little Kingpin. The protagonist's punching power is only about 1/5 of his leg strength. For example, if his leg strength is 100 tons, his punching power is only about 20 tons, which isn't too outrageous. Chapter 17 Attack. Bang! 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 On the skyscrapers and streets of New York City, John's figure roared, running and leaping relentlessly without any cover. After more than a month of basking in the sun, his physical abilities had at least doubled compared to the first day. Now, a single punch from him could generate over 30 tons of force, and his leg muscles were at least 3 times stronger than his arms. With each step, hundreds of tons of muscle force acted on his less than 100 kilograms body, making it almost like flying. In a 100-meter race, only one footprint would be left on the ground. Bang! A huge muffled thud came from beneath his feet, propelling his body through the air for over 100 meters. When those around looked towards the source of the sound, John had vanished without a trace, leaving only splashes of water in the puddles he had just stepped on. In mid-air, the gale whipped his body around, the terrifying speed compressing the surrounding air. If it weren't for the biofield effect, the black combat suit he wore to conceal his identity would have been torn apart by the gas in no time. Minutes later, John's gaze swept across the scene from 100 meters in the air, and he spotted his target, a Wells Fargo bank surrounded by yellow police tape. Ugh, this bank again. John was speechless. Wasn't this the bank he saved on his very first day in the business? So many misfortunes? But he didn't hesitate for long. He leaped off the wall behind him and charged towards the bank like a cannonball. Outside the bank, a group of police officers were gathered, discussing their attack strategy. Just as they were racking their brains over the robbers inside, a loud bang came from above. They instinctively looked up and saw that the windows on the third floor had been shattered, and massive amounts of glass shards were falling from above like rain. What was that sound? Are the robbers going to kill the hostage? Various speculations arose from the officers. Only Chief George, standing nearby, showed a hint of relief. Not long after, a huge scream came from inside the bank. Bang! 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 Then came a series of sounds of glass shattering. One by one, screaming figures were thrown out of the bank, bound by white threads and suspended in midair. Looking at the figures hanging there, a policeman guessed, "Is that Ghost Spider?" But before they could ponder for long, a hand ripped open the closed bank doors. As the doors opened, a black figure emerged, surrounded by hostages. A sharp-eyed policeman immediately recognized him. It's Nemesis. John raised his hand and waved lightly to the policeman amidst the hostages. "Nemesis, when did you get back?" an officer asked curiously. "Just a short while ago. I just got off the plane and saw all this." John smiled and patted the officer on the shoulder. "I've seen your efforts. For the citizens of New York, you are the real heroes." Hearing John praise him like this, some officers who initially didn't have a good impression of him changed their attitude slightly. "Chief George, those guys in the sky are yours. I'll take care of the other things." John looked at George and smiled, handing him a slip of paper. "What's this?" George looked down at the note in his hand, the English lettering of Kex scrawled in a flamboyant, artistic style. "The autograph your son wanted on the phone earlier, right? You said you'd pass it on." John finished speaking and leaped onto the building, disappearing from the officer's sight. "Chief, when did you talk to Kex again?" an officer asked curiously. "My daughter also wanted Kex's autograph. Could you get me one next time, Chief?" George, who had always appeared indifferent to Kex in front of others, found it difficult to handle the stares of his subordinates and could only say sternly, "Is this the time to discuss this? Get back to work, there's a ton of stuff waiting for you." On the streets of New York, a man in tattered clothes clutched an expensive handbag, running frantically through the crowded streets. Behind him, a woman desperately looked around for help, only to see the scoundrel who had snatched her bag disappear into the distance. Just as she had given up hope of getting her handbag back, a steel ball, carrying a great deal of kinetic energy, fell from the sky and slammed into the man's knee. A sound of bones shattering echoed from his knee, and intense pain shot through his brain, causing the running man to scream and collapse to the ground. High in the air, John, free falling, stopped paying attention after throwing the steel ball and simply took out his phone, saying, "There's a robber on Arthur Avenue in Brooklyn. I shattered his knee. Remember to collect it." No sooner had he finished speaking than, with his superhuman eyesight, he immediately spotted 5 or 6 men robbing and vandalizing a store a kilometer away. He pulled several more steel balls from his pocket and hurled them at that spot, instantly shattering the knees of the rioters from a kilometer's distance. After resolving the issue, he continued on the phone, "By the way, at the Bulma convenience store a kilometer away, I also smashed the knees of 5 or 6 thugs who were robbing a group. Remember to check that too." The operator on the other end of the line was speechless. In the past half hour, this nemesis had been constantly on the line, acting as a location tracking device, reporting locations at an average rate of 1 per minute. The police force on this side was almost overwhelmed by his antics. "Okay, received." However, some officers complained that next time, "Could you go a little lighter?" Was smashing the knee too much? The operator suggested. "I'll consider it," John replied casually, but it was just talk. There were too many experienced monsters in New York City right now. He was too busy gaining experience points to worry about the severity of the criminal's injuries. If it weren't for the possibility of releasing these people to commit crimes again and continuing the cycle of exploitation, his steel balls would already be aimed at their heads. Just as John was happily gaining experience points in New York City, a cry for help reached his ears. John turned his head, but his vision was blocked by the building because he hadn't yet developed his X-ray vision. Using his enhanced hearing, he could hear 2 heartbeats coming from the other side of the wall. One was beating too fast due to tension, while the other was beating extremely slowly. A kidnapping. John didn't hesitate and roughly pulled the lock on the door. But the instant the door opened, the slow-beating figure rapidly approached, and then a brown right fist pierced through the door, striking John's sunglasses-wearing eye socket hard, instantly sending him flying more than 10 meters away. Chapter 18: Crushing Strike and Thermal Vision. Boom. John's body was sent flying through the air in a disheveled manner on the bustling street, crashing heavily to the ground. Passers-by, still bewildered by what had happened, gasped in surprise at the sight of the unmarked black uniform worn by the fallen figure. A huge question lingered in their minds: who could have managed to beat the killer so badly? I was careless. I didn't realize something was wrong immediately. Making a fool of myself in the street, John rubbed his forehead and sat up. The impact had created a deep dent in the hard concrete beneath him. Seeing the killer fall, some people immediately tried to help him up, but John stopped them with a raised hand. Only then did he realize that the sunglasses he used to cover his eyes had shattered under the punch of that unknown being. Tisk. John brushed the dust off his clothes with annoyance and said to the surrounding crowd, "Stop watching the show here, go home quickly, it's dangerous here." As he spoke, a brown figure jumped over the railing from the third floor and landed heavily in front of John. This man was nearly 1.9 meters tall, wearing a black suit and matching gloves. He was thin, with pale brown skin and neatly trimmed white hair. His eyes were blood red, filled with murderous intent. John recognized the man immediately upon seeing his appearance, the tombstone-shaped watch on his right hand, and the tombstone tattoo on his arm. Tombstone, the villain from the Spider-Man series. "You've met your match today." Tombstone stood in front of John, looking down slightly at the masked man who was slightly shorter than him, his tone full of disdain. Okay, so before we start fighting, can I ask you a few questions? Why did you attack me?" John raised his hands in surrender. Around the two, bystanders who sensed danger had already fled and called the police. Some reckless onlookers hid behind buildings, secretly filming the aftermath with their phones. Seeing John's surrender, these people were filled with disbelief. How could he surrender before the fight even started? Tombstone hadn't expected his nemesis to act this way, but he was still willing to let him die knowing the truth. "Your recent actions have crossed the line. Someone wants you dead. Someone wants my life? And they can get you to do it? Is it Kingpin?" John asked directly. The moment the question left his mouth, Tombstone's heart skipped a beat, immediately confirming his suspicions. "So why does Kingpin want to kill me?" Thinking about it, he's a gangster. Could he have been behind the riots in New York City today? Did I interfere with his gangster business? John speculated, but the other man was already impatient. "You're about to die, aren't you afraid?" Tombstone grabbed John's collar, trying to lift him up. But he found his left hand firmly gripped by the man in front of him. Scared? There's nothing more exciting than this. John couldn't suppress his laughter. Running into elite monsters on the street, looking for trouble, with who knows what powerful figures might be behind them. Could there be anything more exciting? "Don't worry, I won't kill you." John's mouth, hidden by his mask, stretched into a wide grin. He clenched his right fist, raising it high in an attack stance. Seeing this obvious signal, Tombstone attacked almost simultaneously. The two men, almost in perfect unison, slammed into each other's bodies. Bang! The air seemed to explode as John's right hand struck Tombstone's face solidly, only causing his head to tilt slightly backward. Tombstone's right elbow struck John's ear at the same time, knocking his head to the side. "Arrogant brat, are you just tickling me?" Tombstone grinned disdainfully, but before he could finish speaking, another explosive sound came from his abdomen. John's right hand had struck his abdomen again, unleashing the force of 30 or 40 tons onto Tombstone's body. Tombstone felt a tremendous force pierce his abdomen, his intestines seemingly churning. A long-forgotten pain surged through his nerves, causing his eyes to bulge violently. His body felt as if he'd been struck by a high-speed train, instantly propelled 20 or 30 meters away. Finally managing to stop the impact, Tombstone gagged twice, feeling as if the acid in his stomach was about to gullify him. How could it hurt so much? That force must have been at least tens of tons. Tombstone looked up and saw the nemesis approaching him from afar, flexing his right shoulder as he walked. "Oh, I remember now, you seem to have a setting of hard skin. I heard even a rocket launcher couldn't kill you. Looks like it's a similar ability, but now I can finally use my full strength. You're the first opponent to feel my full power." Behind John, as the situation was reversed with overwhelming advantage, The hidden youths cheered and emerged, celebrating justice's victory over evil once again. John looked at the cumbersome figures around him and couldn't help but click his tongue in disgust. Meanwhile, Gravestone, with just one punch, could clearly feel the difference in strength between himself and his nemesis. I have to escape, or he'll beat me to death. As John approached, cold sweat poured from Gravestone's back. Almost instantly, Gravestone twisted his body, trying to get away from John, but in the time it took to take 2 steps, John was faster, blocking his path and swinging his leg at him. Gravestone almost instinctively raised his hands to block, but the force of a leg hitting him was far beyond his ability to withstand. In the instant of contact, the terrifying force ripped his shirt apart, sending him hurtling towards the building behind him. Boom, boom, boom. The solid walls couldn't completely stop the force of the impact. After smashing through 2 walls, Gravestone's body finally left a huge, spiderweb-like humanoid hard mark on the 3rd wall. Awesome! John exclaimed, thoroughly enjoying the kick. Finally, he had an opponent to test his strength. Overjoyed, he noticed a warm current welling up in his eyes. This is heat vision, John exclaimed in surprise, feeling as if he could emit something from his eyes if he wanted to. Fighting can awaken skills. Just as he focused his attention on his eyes, not far away, Tombstone had already pulled himself out of the wall and, taking advantage of John's distraction, held a terrified passerby in front of him. Tombstone threatened, "Necromancer, if you don't want him to die, let me go." Am I being threatened? John thought absurdly. Chapter 19. You arrested him, so what gives you the right to threaten me? Oh. John finally focused his attention at Tombstone's threatening words. He saw Tombstone, his shirt ripped, gripping a bystander's neck with his right hand, glaring fiercely at him. Tisk tisk tisk. John clicked his tongue in amazement at Tombstone's behavior, going from arrogant to using a bystander to threaten him. I still prefer your previous unruly self. Aren't you going to maintain that? Stop talking nonsense. If you don't want him to die, you're not allowed to follow me anymore, Tombstone said, forcing himself to stay calm. John's 100-ton kick had broken both his arms and injured his internal organs from the repeated impacts. He had no confidence that he could withstand another kick. Killer, save me. I don't want to die. The bystander, who had been watching and filming the commotion, could no longer hold back and frantically begged John for help while being held by Tombstone. After uttering his threat, Tombstone, thinking that the killer wouldn't chase after him, carried the bystander and retreated. But then he saw John walk towards him without hesitation. You nemesis. What do you think you're doing? I won't let you come any closer. Tombstone shouted, tightening his grip on the passerby's neck. Don't assume things. When did I give you permission to leave? John's tone was full of contempt. You? What do you mean? Don't you want him dead? You're holding him, what right do you have to order me around? It's ridiculous. You. Are you even a superhero? Aren't you afraid of being cursed by the citizens? Tombstone shouted incredulously, a look of despair flashing in the eyes of the passerby in his arms. If you're not afraid, why should I be? This passerby will die at your hands. What does it have to do with me? You villain, are you trying to morally blackmail me? That's truly disgusting. John, dressed in black, looked like the Grim Reaper from hell. The moment the hostage fell into your hands, I assumed he was already dead. Just moments ago, when Tombstone lifted the hostage, he had hesitated slightly. The hesitation wasn't about whether the hostage would die, but rather whether the points would be deducted from his own if the hostage died. After system verification, it turned out that as long as the hostage didn't die directly at his hands, the negative energy would be negligible. So it was simple, just a pure math problem. The energy gained from saving the hostage was far less than defeating Tombstone, so why should John hesitate? Just go for it. He wasn't familiar with this hostage, and he had previously warned them to keep their distance. Being captured was a good thing for John. Meanwhile, Tombstone finally understood that the person before him wasn't a superhero. The so-called nemesis was no different from these villains, even more brutal and ruthless. The reason the nemesis hadn't shown this in the past was simply because they hadn't faced such a difficult choice. All done staring? If you're done, get ready to take the hit, John warned, then stomped his foot, leaving a 1-inch footprint in the ground, instantly closing the distance by more than 10 meters. I'll fight you to the death. Tombstone roared, raising the hostage in his hand to throw at the nemesis. But at that moment, he had forgotten that both his arms were broken, and hesitated for a moment as he raised the object. In that instant, the nemesis's right hand slammed into his right cheek, sending him crashing into the shop behind him. After a series of booming sounds, John, with Tombstone's head on his foot and the unconscious hostage on his shoulder, successfully ended the battle. Thinking of Tombstone's final roar, John felt utterly bewildered. How could this guy be angry when he had attacked first? System, display progress bar. Soon, a light blue progress bar appeared before him. 9.526%, 13.248%, that's equivalent to 2 whiplashes, John exclaimed in surprise, then sensed someone approaching. Turning his head, he saw Spider-Gwen standing behind him. You're here. John pulled out the web shooter he borrowed from her. This thing works pretty well. Could you give me a few more? The battle just now. Gwen hesitated, thinking of what she'd witnessed. When he took the hostage, weren't you being too reckless? What's reckless about it? This was the result of careful consideration. John said nonchalantly. Only by letting them know that they can't threaten me with hostages will they stop using them to threaten me in the future. If I had given in this time, those villains would have known I have a weakness. It's better to shatter their illusions directly. Peace is achieved through struggle. Looking at John, who spoke so eloquently, Gwen only felt a pure indifference in his words. She subconsciously asked, would you feel the same way if your loved ones were taken hostage? As soon as the words left her mouth, Gwen regretted it, realizing how tactless she was. How could she have given such an example? John, however, seemed unconcerned, laughing. If it's family? That would be wonderful. I'd really like to see how I bring my parents back to life as hostages, just imagining it would be hilarious. You. Gwen was utterly shocked. She hadn't expected the nemesis to have such a tragic past. She recalled their first meeting, when John introduced himself to George. The nemesis had said his family had been murdered by gangsters months earlier, and after awakening his powers, he was determined to avenge them. So, by day, he studied as a regular high school student, and by night, he was a vigilante, always ready to find the killers and exact revenge. Could this be a fabrication based on his own past? Gwen couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. Considering his actions, it all made sense. The nemesis's coldness stemmed from the fact that his vigilante duty wasn't about punishing evil, but simply about avenging his deceased parents. With this thought, the girl's previous resentment towards John vanished instantly. After all, who could blame someone who had lost their parents for not loving the world? Just as Gwen was lost in her own wild imagination, John had already turned his back to Tombstone, put down the passerby he was carrying on his shoulder, and then slapped the unconscious Tombstone hard across the chest. Smack! A loud echo reverberated throughout the room, instantly waking Tombstone from his infant-like sleep. Nemesis, what else do you want? Tombstone glared angrily, jolted awake. What do I want? Shouldn't I be asking you that? John crouched down and said, where is Kingpin now? You still want revenge on Kingpin? Tombstone asked, bewildered. Stop talking nonsense, just finish what you need to say and you can go to jail. If you keep rambling, I'll give you a few more punches. John threatened, stepping on Tombstone's chest. Signed today. Joy. Chapter 20. Revenge should not be delayed. Is this still a superhero? Gwen sighed, covering her forehead as she watched the nemesis's threatening actions. She wanted to warn him, but hesitated to speak. I'll count to 5. If you don't speak up, your ribs will break. John looked down at the gravestone beneath his feet, his tone eerily calm. 5. John counted the first number, then stomped down hard, causing the gravestone to scream in agony. Wait, didn't you say 5? Gwen said, somewhat reluctantly. Spider-Cun, are you on my side or hers? John's forehead creased with a frown. Besides, his ribs aren't broken, it's just a matter of increasing his strength. I just think this is a bit too cruel, Gwen suggested softly. Yeah, it's too cruel. John clapped and nodded. He only wants my life, but I'm trying to force him to reveal the mastermind. I'm so wicked. Well, you decide what to do, Gwen said, turning her back, no longer interfering. Are you willing to talk now? John looked down at Tombstone, his tone stern. 5 seconds have passed. If you keep being stubborn, you'll have to go to the hospital before you go to jail. Oh no, you probably need to go to the hospital now. John looked at his broken hands. The bus should be in Value Line Corporation's headquarters right now. Tombstone gasped for breath, finally giving in. You should have said so earlier, Value Line Corporation, right? John nodded, retracting his right foot. He then pulled his phone from his pocket, only to find it had been broken by Tombstone's initial punch. What a nuisance. He could only put his phone away, preparing to borrow Gwen's phone to call the police, when the sound of police sirens gradually approached from afar. During Tombstone's fight with a nemesis, some fleeing civilians had called the police. Upon hearing that someone could hold their own against the nemesis, George immediately knew it was no small matter and rushed over with a dozen police officers. As soon as the officers got out of the patrol car, they noticed John's disheveled appearance. His hood was drooping, his sunglasses were gone, and his black trench coat was covered in dust. He looked utterly wretched. Seeing John's state, the officers were all shocked. They had never seen their nemesis so disheveled. It seemed they had truly met a formidable foe. John pointed behind him. Officers, you've come at the right time. We just caught a supervillain here, extremely aggressive. Remember to keep a close watch on him. Following John's finger, the officers were shocked again. Compared to the nemesis's disheveled state, the man lying inside was truly pitiful. His shirt was completely torn, there was a bruised fist mark on his abdomen, and his hands were awkwardly placed to one side. Clearly he had been badly beaten. What crime did this guy commit? George asked. A gangster thug, ordered by Kingpin to kill me. It's attempted murder, I guess. See if we can dig up some dirt on him. If not, let him stay in jail for a few months to reflect. Kingpin? How did you get involved with him? George frowned. How would I know? Maybe he sees me working too hard on criminals and interfering with his underworld business. I suspect he's partly responsible for today's increased crime rate. Sheriff, who's Kingpin? Spider-Gwen, who had recently become a superhero, asked curiously. The absolute leader of the New York underworld. His influence can affect supervillains worldwide. But because his methods are so sophisticated, he only orders his subordinates to commit crimes. We haven't had any evidence to indict him, George explained. Whatever, I'm going to beat him up first. John ran out of the shop and then disappeared into the crowd with a leap. Who is he going to beat up? George asked Gwen. Kingpin, I guess, Gwen said uncertainly. What? George exclaimed in disbelief. At Value Line Corporation headquarters, Kingpin frowned as he listened to his subordinate's report. You said Tombstone failed? Yes, the manager stammered. According to our informants, Tombstone was no match for the nemesis. He was easily defeated. Kingpin pondered for a moment after hearing the report. Since Tombstone failed, it seems that Nemesis is quite capable. In that case, let's evacuate here, lie low for a while, and then find a way to deal with Nemesis. Kingpin instructed his subordinate. Yes, boss. The manager bowed and obeyed. By the way, where is Tombstone now? I heard he was handed over to the police by Nemesis on charges of attempted murder. Then tomorrow, find a lawyer to bail him out. Kingpin suddenly turned his head and saw a figure dressed entirely in black rapidly approaching through the air. With a bang, John kicked the floor-to-ceiling window in front of Kingpin, landing right in front of him. A nemesis? Despite this sudden attack, King remained calm, looking coldly at John, whose clothing was easily recognizable. HMPH. John chuckled. I heard you were looking for someone to kill me, so here I am, delivering myself to your doorstep. He sized up the underworld tycoon before him, a massive figure taller than Tombstone, his large, fat face making his features appear somewhat delicate. Dressed in a red suit, he looked like a nouveau riche, with a ring on each of his 10 fingers. After John barged in, he gripped his black cane even tighter. What do you want here, to kill me? King retorted. Of course not. I fully acknowledge your criminal abilities, but I certainly can't kill you outright, John chuckled. I just want you to spend a few days in jail. Jail. Kingpin chuckled, his features widening. What evidence do you have that I've broken the law? So, it seems legal means aren't an option, John said with difficulty. Then I'll just have to break all your bones and send you to the hospital. I'm sure you'll behave much better in the hospital than in court. You want to beat a citizen with no criminal record into the hospital. Don't you know that's illegal? I know, but the one who beats me is my nemesis. I'm sure the court summons won't reach my home. John smiled, touching the mask that obscured his face. Otherwise, why would he wear a mask? If things went too far, he could just change his disguise in a few days. A flaw. Seeing John touch his mask, Kingpin's eyes lit up. Suddenly, He lunged forward, thrusting his black cane fiercely at John. Sizzle! In the blink of an eye, a sharp spike shot out from the tip of the cane, but John grabbed the cane with one hand, unable to move forward or backward. Kingpin pressed a button on his cane, and a terrifying current capable of electrocuting an elephant surged from it, only causing a slight numbness in John's right arm. John snapped the cane in half, coldly saying, "If this is all you can do, then you can expect to have all your bones broken." Chapter 21 Head Smashes of Boulder. At the Value Line Corporation headquarters, a piercing alarm blared throughout the building. Being a company founded by the underworld for money laundering, its security was undoubtedly formidable. The security guards employed there were either well-known gangsters, renowned martial arts masters, or retired mercenaries. Upon hearing the alarm, the security team, knowing trouble was brewing, rushed towards the top floor, carrying machetes and various firearms. A scarred man at the head of the team reached the top floor first, grabbing the manager by the collar at the door, demanding, "What's going on? Why did you sound the alarm? The killer is here for revenge." The boss is confronting him inside. The manager, who had just emerged, hurriedly explained to the arriving security guards. "The killer? How did we get involved with him?" one guard asked, puzzled. The next moment, a series of deafening roars erupted from inside the building. Boom. Boom 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 boom. "What's going on inside? Is it a bomb?" "It's so loud," someone shouted, feeling the hard concrete floor beneath his feet tremble. Some of the Boulder guards had already flung open the door, revealing the interior, but even a single glance was enough to make the guards gasp. As the door swung open, the roar intensified, becoming increasingly deafening. Inside, a man in a black robe was exchanging punches with Kingpin at an incredibly fast pace. The deafening impacts vibrated their eardrums. Each punch created a shock wave, the immense pressure even shattering the windows. 10 punches per second? 20 punches per second? Because of their rapid pace, the guards couldn't even discern the frequency of their blows, only seeing their figures standing still and their forehands blurring into after images. Is it a close match? Some speculated, but those with sharp eyes noticed the ground beneath their feet. Under John's feet, thanks to a biofield covering the ground, the surface only cracked slightly, while Kingpin's ankles were deeply embedded in the marble tiles. "What are you waiting for? Shoot!" The scarred security guard, the first to reach the top floor, roared and drew his gun without hesitation, firing a shot at John's head. Bang! The trigger was pulled, and in the muzzle flash, a bullet shot out, heading straight for John's temple. With a clang, the guards were horrified to see a deflated bullet sliding limply down John's temple. But the guard's attack wasn't entirely ineffective. The bullet momentarily distracted John, allowing Kingpin to deliver a powerful punch to his jaw. The impact sent John flying backward, leaving 2 deep furrows in the ground before finally coming to a stop. John clenched his fist and said, "I thought Tombstone was already strong, but I didn't expect there to be another expert. You are indeed a bit stronger than me in terms of strength." He couldn't help but sigh inwardly. As expected of a notorious villain in the Spider-Man universe, he overpowered Spider-Man in his normal state with his strength. If it weren't for the superhuman defense provided by Superman's body, he probably wouldn't be a match for this guy. At this moment, John's clothes below the elbows were torn open from the face-to-face punches, and his black gloves were gone. His long, slender, white fingers were stained with crimson blood that wasn't his. Kingpin's face was gloomy and he didn't speak. His once powerful fists were now covered in blood. And you could even see the cracked bone beneath the flesh. Blood was dripping down his fingers. He clearly felt that the Kelvin's strength couldn't suppress him, but every time they punched, he felt like he was hitting a hard iron. No, even a hard iron would be destroyed by him now, but the Kelvin was completely unharmed. Kingpin, controlling the trembling in his arm, looked at the nemesis and said, "I'll give you $1 billion, let's be friends, and pretend nothing happened, okay?" "Sure, but we'll talk about it after you're in the hospital." John nodded. "Really, can't we negotiate?" Kingpin wanted to try again, but saw the impatient nemesis's fist rapidly enlarging in front of him. "Stop talking nonsense, I'm having a good time." John threw a punch while running. The swift punch sent Kingpin's massive body flying, crashing through the wall behind him, and falling dozens of meters from the top of the building. John, without hesitation, jumped off the building, a flash of red light in his eyes before he left. His crimson gaze pierced the right arm of the scarred man who had fired the shot earlier, and after seeing the man scream in pain, John fell to the ground with satisfaction. Downstairs, A tremendous tremor shook the ground. Passers-by looked on and saw a gigantic man, 7 feet tall and 5 feet wide, slam into the ground, creating a deep crater. Even Kingpin, landing from dozens of meters high, couldn't help but cough up blood. He tried to get up but saw his nemesis, like a persistent leech, descending from the sky, using the force of his fall to deliver a powerful punch to Kingpin's ribs. Ah! Kingpin screamed. Then, like a desperate wild boar, he grabbed his nemesis's body with both hands, flipped him over, pinned him to the ground, and raised his hand to smash it down on his head. Boom! 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 3 punches followed, Kingpin growing increasingly desperate. It felt like he was hammering a solid bronze statue. The force of tens of tons hitting his face only managed to knock his mask askew. Finished? Now it's my turn. John laughed, grabbing Kingpin by the collar and, to the astonishment of the onlookers, lifting the 400-pound man. Like swinging a sledgehammer, each blow to Kingpin's face slammed into the ground with increasing force. Every time Kingpin's face hit the ground, a shower of rubble flew out of the concrete. He continued this for over a dozen blows, until several foot-thick craters were left in the ground. John then stopped, looked down at the unconscious Kingpin, and let his body fall to the ground. This should keep him quiet in the hospital for half a year, right? John guessed, then thought to himself, system, 13.248%, 24.62%, fantastic. No wonder he's a mafia boss, his influence is immense. Just one beating has done more work than I've done in the past month, John exclaimed excitedly, wishing Kingpin would get up right now and kill a few more people so he could perform more acts of chivalry. He only needed to defeat 7 more monsters like Kingpin to level up. At this moment, the security guard on the roof came down again. Seeing Kingpin lying beside John, he immediately prepared to attack. However, as the red light flashed, John used his heat vision to slice through the gun barrels and arms of everyone who pointed a gun at him. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22: Kingpin's Revenge. Outside Value Line Corporation, after dealing with Kingpin, John stood with his hands in his pockets, coldly watching Kingpin's thugs. Under his icy gaze, not one dared to step forward. What a joke. This was a monster who could fall unscathed from dozens of meters high. These lowly security guards, who couldn't even beat Kingpin, dared to dread this misfortune. A few of them had been fearless daredevils, but the moment they raised their guns, their hands were gone. Seeing that they were completely intimidated, John didn't bother to intervene, instead saying calmly, "Get your boss to the hospital immediately. Remember to find the best hospital in New York." What's going on? The thugs were all dumbfounded. They had expected their nemesis to kill their boss, but instead, he was telling them to take their boss to the hospital. What was this? A beating followed by a sweet treat? But this beating was far too harsh. What are you all standing there for? Did you hear me? John shouted, seeing the group's stunned expressions. After confirming that Kingpin's nemesis wasn't joking, Kingpin's men approached him with trepidation, assessing his condition. They were immediately horrified by his gruesome state. Kingpin was beyond miserable. His entire body was covered in blood, with broken bones protruding from his skin. If it weren't for the faint rise and fall of his chest, they would have already called the funeral home. Watching them hastily lift Kingpin onto a stretcher and rush him to the nearest hospital, John finally looked away and headed home. Having survived 2 major battles, his clothes were tattered, the sleeves below the wrists were gone, and his black sneakers were badly worn. He needed to go home and change. Several minutes later, the police car finally arrived. George, staring at the blood-stained crater in front of Value Line Corporation, hurriedly pulled aside a bystander and asked, "I'm the commissioner of the NYPD. Wasn't the king of Kingpin fighting here just now?" Yes, he beat a fat guy up badly. Bone fragments were flying out, and he was covered in blood," the bystander described, still shaken. Hearing that the king of Kingpin had won the fight, George initially relaxed, then, as if remembering something, let out a heavy sigh. "Commander, what's wrong?" a nearby officer asked, noticing George's fluctuating mood. "The king of Kingpin broke the law," George said, his brow furrowed. "He's a criminal now. But, that's Kingpin. You all know Kingpin is a notorious supervillain. Gwen, who had come in with a police car, couldn't help but chime in. "That's still breaking the law. I'm a cop, I have to follow procedure," George said sternly. Seeing her father's serious expression, Gwen, who aspired to be a superhero, felt somewhat discouraged. Although George's words made sense, they still significantly dampened her enthusiasm. Seeing Ghost Spider's dejected look, George, still not recognizing her, warned, "This is also a reminder. I know you have grudges to settle, but if you break the law, the NYPD will absolutely not let you off the hook." Then, George turned to his men and said, "From now on, Neptune will also be our arrest target." Faced with her father's unwavering principles, Gwen said nothing more, but instead shot her web towards a distant building before leaving dejectedly. Late at night, back in his long-missed little apartment, John finished showering, casually dried himself off, and walked out naked. Sprawling on the sofa and turning on the television. That night, Neptune once again dominated the headlines of New York City. However, this time the headlines were different, filled with accusations against Neptune. On television, a reporter stood inside an emergency room, solemnly recounting the identity of the man lying in the ER to viewers. "Ladies and gentlemen," the reporter said, "Mr. Wilson is still in critical condition in the ER. As the founder of one of the world's top 3 charitable organizations, Mr. Wilson has dedicated his life to helping countless impoverished children and families in need. But such a good man was inexplicably attacked and brutally beaten by a bane, a derogatory term for a ruthless individual. I urge the New York Police Department to take responsibility and arrest this masked, unlicensed officer." As the reporter spoke, the camera panned to a close-up of Kingpin's disfigured face in the ER, stirring up strong emotions. Outside the hospital, George was representing the New York Police Department, answering questions from reporters. "Chief, what are your thoughts on the attack on philanthropist Wilson Grant Fisk by the Kingston?" George replied solemnly, "The New York Police Department is currently investigating, but according to the current information, it seems Wilson hired the assassin first." Before George could finish, a reporter interrupted, "So, the police have confirmed that the Kingston broke the law? Will any action be taken against him? Rumors suggest you have some private connections with the Kingston. Will you choose to protect him? Why did the riots in New York City quell as soon as the Kingston returned? Is he the mastermind behind all of this?" A barrage of prepared statements overwhelmed George's words. Faced with these malicious accusations, George could only helplessly repeat, "The New York Police Department guarantees to uphold the justice of the law. Please rest assured, citizens of New York." "Boss, the reporters have left." As the television reporters left, the emergency room door opened, and the manager who had been handling Kingpin's affairs earlier entered. Upon hearing his subordinate's report, Kingpin, who had been on the verge of death from exhaustion, suddenly opened his eyes. The doctors who had been feigning emergency care immediately stepped aside. Although Kingpin had been badly beaten by John, with at least dozens of bones broken throughout his body, he was still physically strong and had been brought back from the brink of death after just one afternoon of emergency care. The doctors beside him were merely putting on a show to appease the reporters. How are the arrangements outside?" Kingpin asked weakly. "The media has been bribed, and they are also trying their best to fabricate and dig up dirt on the nemesis, but his identity is still under investigation," the manager replied. "Very good." Kingpin's eyes blazed with vengeance. "My nemesis, your disgrace is just the first step. After that, I will make you kneel and beg for mercy. None of your family or friends will escape." In his rage, Kingpin clenched his fist, momentarily forgetting that his arm was also broken. The next moment, a painful groan escaped his throat. The doctor, who had only been pretending, was so frightened by the sight that he immediately rushed forward to treat him. Chapter 23: Cyberbullying and Anti-Violence. Late at night, Gwen was browsing the news at home. All she saw were all sorts of vile insults and attacks against Klitschko, most of which were fabricated. She, who usually considered herself to have a good temper, was so angry reading these comments that her blood pressure almost spiked. How can people online be so terrifying? Gwen, who had rarely experienced malice from others, rubbed her slightly reddened head and exclaimed indignantly. But what frustrated her was that some of the online insults against Klitschko were indeed true. For example, someone had filmed him ignoring the hostage threat during his fight with Gravestone and attacking without hesitation. There was also the illegal act of beating Kingpin, who had no criminal record, into the hospital. Whenever she saw these unreasonable smears and tried to defend Klitschko, The trolls would just present real evidence of wrongdoing, standing on their moral high ground and leaving her speechless. Later that night, she discovered that her account had been suspended due to too many reports. How could this be? Gwen angrily crushed her mouse in her hand, experiencing the fury of cyberbullying for the first time. Just as she was silently fuming, she noticed the online sentiment suddenly shift. A massive number of accounts began to emerge, fiercely opposing Kingpin and supporting him. Simultaneously, a flood of damaging information about Kingpin surfaced, revealing overt and covert deals that silenced the online trolls and paid commenters. Then, a large number of rational voices emerged, refuting the slanderous claims against Kingpin, labeling those who were simply venting their emotions as idiots, and relentlessly attacking them. If the previous cyberbullying against Kingpin was like a small ripple, this reverse cyberbullying was its tsunami. The online trolls hired by Kingpin found themselves facing an almost endless number of enemies online. For every attack they made against Kingpin, more than 10 sarcastic comments appeared in the comments section within a minute. Gwen, who witnessed the entire online ordeal, was stunned. Although she didn't know what was happening, it was clear that some people were supporting Kingpin. In the house across from Gwen's, John was somewhat surprised by the dramatic shift in the online narrative, unsure who was behind it. But looking at those being cyberbullied, why think so much? Just enjoy it. In high spirits, he decided to skip the night and reward himself by going out and beating up criminals. John changed into spare clothes, then took the data card from his damaged phone and inserted it into his new one. The moment he turned it on, he saw 3 or 4 missed calls related to George. Just as he was about to make a call, a new unknown number called. John hesitated for a moment, then casually answered. "Hey, Nemesis, how's your night? Having a good time?" A gruff, masculine voice came from the phone. Stark. John's eyes lit up. Now he finally understood who the other online trolls were helping him. Yes, when it comes to cyberbullying, which troll army could compare to Tony Stark with his AI? It seemed his act of saving him had been worthwhile. Very good, looks like you haven't forgot me. I saw the new element you mentioned, and it's currently being manufactured. If all goes well, you'll have saved the great Iron Man's life. Okay, kid. You saved me, what do you want? I can act as a genie for a while and grant you 3 wishes. On the other end of the phone, Tony Stark held a glass of champagne, looking at the futuristic city plan in front of him, his tone smug. 3 wishes? Then transfer your company to my name and work for me for 30 years. John teased. PFFT. Tony spat out the champagne he had just taken a sip of, then angrily said, "Aren't you afraid of choking to death?" "Just kidding, I believe you won't mind." John laughed. Tony Stark said irritably, "You think you're funny? You're the first person to dare joke with me like that. Tell me your request quickly, I'm busy." "Alright, my first request is, you make me a suit." John said. "A suit? What kind? Like my armor?" "No, just make me a suit similar to Superman's from DC Comics, but make sure the main color is black, and absolutely no underwear on the outside." John instructed. "Superman suit? Aren't you wearing a mask? Do you want me to add a hood to the suit?" Stark thought of that comical scene, and a slight smile appeared on his lips. "No need, just make it the normal style," John said. "I'll need it eventually. I understand your first request. What else do you want?" John thought for a moment and said, "Help me set up a fund." "A fund?" "Yes, if I cause damage to buildings or personnel during the battle, you can use the money in the fund to make up for it. Of course, I can provide the money myself, it's just that you have to be the one to do it." "That's easy." Hearing the Nemesis make such a request, Stark agreed without hesitation. "I'll provide all the funds and personnel, so that no one knows that I, Tony, can't afford it. This is what you deserve for saving my life." "Okay, then there's only one last request." John didn't insist and continued, "I want you to make sure that those guys who are slandering me online only get 1 questionnaire in the census." Stark was stunned for a moment, then laughed out loud. He felt that this guy was very much to his liking, so he agreed, "No problem, Jarvis, increase the offensiveness of the network counterattack program to the highest level." "Yes, sir." Jarvis's elegant voice immediately came from inside the room. After hanging up the phone, John's mood improved even more, and he went out to randomly strike 2 criminals to add to the merriment. Meanwhile, online, Jarvis, the artificial intelligence, was stirring up a bloodbath. A flood of spam poured into the internet, Anyone who dared to speak ill of the nemesis online was immediately traced back to its source, and then relentlessly mocked in the comments section of every single one. Many videos that initially had only 40 or 50 comments were likely to garner over 1,000 by tonight, and some netizens were even scared into deleting their accounts. If anyone still didn't see the problem after this level of activity, then they were truly idiots. Everyone knew that a massive online force was driving the nemesis. This showdown between Kingpin's Capital and Stark Technology ended with netizens being subjected to reverse cyberbullying. Nick Fury of SHIELD, watching the chaos online, couldn't sit still any longer. He had been considering secretly helping John, but this commotion forced him to call Stark and warn him to be careful. Chapter 24 Intimate Encounters with Gwen. Early morning sunlight, indiscriminately and evenly bathing the New York landscape, illuminated John's street. Dressed in typical high school attire, John walked in the sunlight. As the solar energy within his cells increased, his image increasingly aligned with his inner ideal of perfection. This perfection wasn't just about appearance, it permeated his aura, or rather, his presence. Just as a person in a high position exudes authority, John, walking down the street, gradually radiated a strong sense of presence, frantically attracting attention. This attention wasn't drawn from his looks, but from a harmonious beauty in his posture and movements, like an apex predator naturally commanding reverence. Passers-by noticed John first, then realized how handsome he was, and subsequently felt an instinctive liking for him. This special feeling could only be experienced in person. Photos or videos diminished its impact. After politely declining an older woman's offer to take him to her home to see her cat that could do somersaults, John watched her dejected figure as she walked away, and began to consider whether he should get a pair of Superman glasses. Despite attracting a lot of attention, no one around her would associate this handsome underage high school student with a nemesis. In the small house across from John's, Gwen dragged her tired body out of bed. With slightly dark circles under her eyes, she envied the nemesis's incredible energy, working 24/7 without sleep. After witnessing Jarvis's online mudslide that flooded her small pond all night, although she felt it wasn't right, Gwen did feel a sense of relief. She felt that Jarvis and his online trolls were practically her internet mouthpieces, saying everything she wanted to say. However, by the time she realized it, it was already 3 or 4 in the morning, leaving her sleep-deprived the next day. The girl yawned, quickly washed up, and went downstairs for dinner. After yesterday's retaliatory crackdown on crime, they had successfully brought down New York City's crime rate again. George, exhausted from dealing with the media and his boss, greeted Gwen as soon as he saw her, but received a lukewarm response. George, who hadn't thought much of it at first, was immediately drawn to his wife's words. Helen looked at her daughter with concern and said, "What did you do yesterday? Teacher James said you weren't feeling well and took the day off, but you weren't home either." "Oh no." Gwen's shoulders stiffened, unsure how to respond. Sure enough, George immediately tensed up. "You took the day off to go out and play. Don't you know how dangerous it was outside yesterday?" "Actually, it wasn't that dangerous." Gwen's voice trailed off, finally stopping under her parents' stern gazes. Overwhelmed by the pressure, she quickly swallowed her breakfast and said, "I'm going to school now. See you tonight." Watching his daughter's departing figure, George felt utterly exhausted, unsure what to say. Then, Helen beside him frowned slightly and said, "Could Gwen be in a relationship?" "What?" This remark shocked George even more than before. Suddenly taking the day off and being so hesitant when questioned, "Isn't that obvious?" Helen thought. "I need to talk to her," George said, his tone more serious than ever before. "All right, but don't scare her. If it's true, don't get too excited. Let's see how the boy is first," Helen said gently. George replied succinctly, his thoughts unknown. Meanwhile, Gwen, who had just left her house, saw John, who had changed back into ordinary clothes, emerge from his home. Kent, no, maybe he's the nemesis. Gwen thought of her earlier guess and decided to secretly follow John. She then saw John, a conspicuous figure on his way to school, attracting attention like crazy. In just 2 kilometers, he rejected 3 groups of women who tried to flirt with him. Is this too much? Although I know John is handsome, and many people at school are interested in him, but is it really that outrageous? Gwen thought in shock as she watched John smile as he rejected the invitations of the kind-hearted older sister. But despite her shock, Gwen was determined to confirm John's identity. As long as he remained within her sight, She could confirm his identity regardless of whether the nemesis appeared or not. Meanwhile, John was speechless. His super hearing had detected Gwen's decision to follow him the moment she did. What's this guy up to? Why is he watching me again? John wondered. Did he discover my identity? Adhering to the principle of not revealing his identity unless absolutely necessary, John tried to pretend he hadn't noticed the follower. But the guy behind him seemed determined to get what he wanted, tailing her from the moment she started school until she left. John checked the time. He'd already wasted almost 10 minutes on the way home. If he delayed any longer, who knew how long it would drag on? He was too lazy to continue this charade, so he decided to confront him. Gwen carefully rounded a corner, only to find the figure gone. A sense of unease washed over her, and she instinctively took a step back, only to bump into someone. Turning around, she saw Kent, who had been following her all day, standing behind her. "Little spider, do you have some trouble that needs my help?" "You've been following me all day," John said, hands in his pockets, looking down at the girl so close to him, his tone slightly impatient. "You know who I am, so you really are K. Gwen looked at John in shock, never expecting her identity to be exposed first. But before she could finish speaking, John covered her mouth with his right hand and pressed her against the wall. "Don't you know you shouldn't pry into other people's privacy?" John threatened, leaning close to Gwen's ear. "You probably don't want Chief George to know that your daughter is the infamous ghost spider, do you?" To John's surprise, Gwen's struggle suddenly intensified, and she managed to pull John's right hand away by grabbing his wrist. "My dad's car is coming from behind," Gwen said nervously, clutching John's arm. "Huh?" John turned his head and saw Chief George driving a car slowly towards them from across the street after get-off work, stopping steadily in front of them. As the car window slowly rolled down, George's face turned extremely ugly as he looked at their overly intimate position, but he still sighed and said, "Gwen, remember to bring Kent over for dinner tomorrow night. I'm going home now, you two continue talking." Chapter 25. A single utterance from her beautiful mouth resulted in hemiplegia. Bring Kent home for dinner tomorrow? Watching George drive away, Gwen's mind went blank for a moment, then she noticed their current position. They were in a classic wall-slamming position, and from George's perspective, it was reasonable to assume a kiss was coming. A blush suddenly spread across the girl's face, and with a sudden burst of strength, she pushed John back 2 steps. "Ha." John, pushed away, thought about the scene just now, but without any other thoughts, he just found it hilarious and laughed hysterically beside her. Looking at the carefree guy beside her, Gwen's anger flared up instantly. "Is it that funny? My dad will definitely think you're my boyfriend, and he's going to take you to my house for dinner tomorrow. What am I going to do now?" "Then let's go for dinner," John said nonchalantly, shrugging. "Anyway, the final outcome won't affect me, and I can even get a free meal." "You might not be affected, but my reputation," Gwen irritably pulled at her light blonde hair, lost in regret. Why did she have to worry about her nemesis's identity? Now that her identity has been discovered, her image in her father's eyes is ruined, and she'll have to explain herself properly when she gets back. Lost in her own thoughts, Gwen turned her head and saw John walking towards an alley with a shoulder bag. "Where are you going?" "Fighting crime, maintaining peace," John said casually. "If dinner is cancelled tomorrow, let me know at school." "That guy," Gwen was extremely annoyed, but still replied irritably, "I know." Not far from them, Peter Parker watched the two chatting happily, said nothing, just gripped a vial of green potion in his hand and silently left. In a cheerful mood, John changed into his uniform and ran towards some of the most crime-ridden neighborhoods in New York City. But what happened next plunged his spirits to rock bottom. In Staten Island, New York, John had just dealt with a store robbery. Looking at the criminal groaning in pain at his feet, John pulled out his phone to call the police to cover it up. But then, as if sensing something, he abruptly shifted a distance, a spittle grazing his spot and dripping onto the ground. Looking at the puddle of spittle, and remembering the state of his clothes if he hadn't dodged, John's gaze shifted with a hint of hostility towards the guy who had spat at him. Opposite him, a teenage-looking young man with blonde hair was staring at him, his eyes filled with anger. "If you don't give me a reasonable explanation, have you thought about the consequences?" John said coldly. Although he was doing good deeds because of the system, it didn't mean he should be bullied for no reason. "You don't deserve to be a superhero. New York City doesn't need you. Get out of New York City," the blonde-haired man shouted, pointing at John with his right hand. In yesterday's online harassment of the nemesis, he had initially believed online rumors and joined the fray without hesitation. As a result, when Jarvis finally got going, he was shocked to find his comments flooded with messages from countless accounts, all his previous comments being bombarded. His classmates noticed the anomaly on his account, and after word spread, some of his fans even openly mocked him in class. This led to his impulsive actions today. After all, in his mind, superheroes wouldn't attack civilians even if they were criticized by them, right? Oh, so you spat at me for no reason. John sneered, slightly lifting his mask to reveal his mouth. What does he want to do? A puzzled look crossed the minds of the bystanders, while the blond-haired man felt a sense of foreboding. His previous impulse quickly subsided, and he raised his foot to run. Then I'll spit water on you too, John thought to himself. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, he pursed his lips slightly, then his cheek muscles and orbicularis oris muscles worked together, aiming at the blond-haired youth. A jet of water shot out of his mouth in an instant. Thump. At the moment the water jet left his mouth, those around could clearly feel the immense wind pressure from the compressed air in John's mouth as the water jet exited. The strong gust of air even whipped the sleeves of those around him. Then, a loud thud rang out, and the running blond-haired man was struck hard in the back, his body flying through the air and crashing into a shelf, instantly losing consciousness. Upon closer inspection, a large hole was torn in the youth's white vest, revealing purplish-black flesh beneath. Yes. Bullseye. Looking at the unconscious youth, John pulled down his mask and snapped his fingers with a smile. He mentally asked, "System, how much progress did that deduct?" The other party provoked trouble first, and the host acted in excessive self-defense. The progress bar has been deducted by 0.014%. Please check the progress bar immediately. Based on the current progress bar, if you act in excessive self-defense 2,103 more times, or innocently kill 251 people, your progress bar will reach 0, and the system will disintegrate on the spot. That's half an hour's worth of work. John frowned slightly. Although he felt a pang of regret, he would still retaliate if faced with a similar situation. John had anticipated that this young man, who disliked him, would come, but he hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. Since he was here, he decided to beat up every troublemaker. Only then would those scoundrels know that the killer wasn't entirely a good guy and would resort to violence against ordinary people. Only with enough negative examples would those brainless brutes consider the cost of their actions. Having dealt with the blonde-haired guy, John was about to leave when he was stopped. The shop owner approached nervously, saying, "Killer, could you wait a moment?" "What is it? Is there anything else I can help you with?" John asked, looking at the middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s. No, I just wanted to ask you to leave my shop alone from now on," the owner said sincerely. Why? John's eyes narrowed slightly. "Those gangsters said last night that any shop that dares to accept your help will be specifically targeted and harassed," the owner said, feigning distress. Hearing this, John smiled. There were still such arrogant gangs in New York City? It seemed Kingpin was behind it again. They dare to play dirty tricks. This is no ordinary enemy. We must strike hard. John made up his mind. "I understand. Don't worry, your shop will be fine afterward," John assured him, then turned and walked into the darkness amidst the awe-inspiring gazes of those around him. 10 minutes later, the policeman looked down at the wound on the blonde-haired youth's back in astonishment and said, "Are you sure this was caused by saliva? Even a high-pressure water gun wouldn't have this power." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.